Live stream party for Skylar Fiction versus Eric Hernandez on Modern Day Debate. Now, as you can see, I have the music turned down. John Dunphy from JMD Apologetics is here with me. Real quick, I guess before the debate starts, actually, if you want to see it without the commentary, so yeah, me and John and Tim Howard might be joining us. Yeah, we're just going to be watching the debate together, commenting on it, talking, just hanging out kind of as it goes. If you want to be able to see it without all the distractions, though, there's a link in the description to Modern Day Debates channel where you can just see it there live. Now, of course, as James pointed out to me, you could just have two browser windows open and see both going on at the same time, so just go back and forth. Totally up to you guys. But yeah, in fact, if you look, I'm actually going to make it full stream here soon. And John, I'm going to ask you in a minute what you think your predictions are for the debate, because if you look at the chat, it's mostly just people dogging on Eric Hernandez, saying, well, Tom Jump's already destroyed him and all this stuff, and showing how dumb his arguments are. So, you know, no love for Eric. Actually, I don't know. The tide might turn. That does seem to be how it goes usually. Is the atheists kind of come in early, and then the tide tends to turn later on. But so my guess here is, so the debate title, if you look at it, centered around theism, not Christian theism, which I'm really interested to see how that goes, because from what I've seen from Skylar Fiction, which I haven't seen a whole bunch, but he's usually like critiquing the Bible, and he usually has Dr. Josh on his channel. I think it's Dr. Josh. To criticize the Old Testament, slavery, and all this. And he's not going to have that out. Now, he might still go for that, but considering it's not the title of the debate, Eric might not let him. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. And so I am curious as to what argument Eric's going to bring. I'm assuming something probably from the soul, from the free will. I'm curious as to see if he brings an argument for morality, because Skylar Fiction in his past, like when you look at his discussion with Mike Winger, denies the existence of objective morality. Of course, until he wants to say the Old Testament's immoral. But like I said, that's just kind of my preliminary thoughts. I'm interested to see how it'll go based on that. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like not Tyler. Oh my goodness, I'm thinking of Tyler versus Matt Dillahunty. No, I definitely think Skylar will probably focus on objective morality of Eric Hernandez brings that up. Well, if Eric brings up other arguments for God's existence, I don't think Skylar is too up to date on them, because if you look at some of his past debates with Matt Slick, like Matt Slick would bring up evidences for the Bible from history and stuff, and I think Skylar is better on the morality side. So if Eric goes into more classical arguments for theism, then I think he may have some difficulties with that. But he'll probably bring up the problem of evil, I feel like. So. Yeah,
that's a good point. He might, because that is something you can use against theism, not just Christian theism. Now, again, the way that I've seen him use it in the past is he'll say, well, look, here you have Bible verses that say God loves all people or God loves all children, but look, here's all these children that die, or look, God commands the slaughter of the Canaanites, which of course include children. And so he claims he's making more of a more internal critique, but of course he tried that with Trent Doherty. And remember, they weren't talking about the Bible. Oh, there he is. I'm going to turn him up a little bit.
Good arguments for or against theism, and we're starting right now.
But he won't be able to make the biblical internal critique again unless he goes there and Eric says, well, okay, let's just go there. That's what I'm curious as what happened, is if Eric will allow him on the terms of the debate to go into Christian doctrine, or if he'll force him to say, hey, can you give me a logical argument? That's what Trent Doherty did. Trent Doherty said, hey, you can't just complain about bad things that happen. You have to give me a logical argument that kind of deduces that God can't exist. And,
swords with many.
you know, Skylar Fiction, from what I've seen, he's a pretty nice guy until you back him into a corner and then he goes rogue. So it will be, I'm curious and excited to see what happens. I'm going to quiet down just a little bit here. And people, if you're wondering why you can't see John,
coming up, so for example,
he just didn't want to see you guys.
Tomorrow night,
that's kind of why that
on
is
evolution.
me,
So that should be
I'm going to
a lot
quiet down
of
a
fun.
little bit and try to
also
listen to
let
James.
you know, we are a nonpartisan channel, which means we have no positions as a channel. We want people to feel welcome, whether you be Christian, atheist, or one of the many strange creatures in between. So with that, you're going to get rolling here. Basically, it's going to be 10-minute openings from each side, followed by open conversation. Following that, we'll have Q&A. So if you have a question, fire it into the old live chat. And also, Super Chat's another option. If you do a Super Chat, it gives you an opportunity to also make a comment during the question and answer, to which the debaters would get to respond to. And it'll also push your question or comment to the top of the list for the Q&A. So with that, without any further ado, very excited, folks, I'm going to kick it over to Eric, who's going to have his roughly, and again, this is flexible, 10-minute opening statement.
That's technically original art.
Eric, thanks so much for being
live
here.
on his side. I'm going to try not to interrupt Eric too much because I'm curious as to what
thanks for having me. Thanks, Skyler, for coming on.
Give my
and to just kind of jump right in, take advantage of the time. So the line
because otherwise I would be here. You'd be over there. Under the debate, which you should go there anyway. You know, subscribe. But, you know,
is a rule of logic that'll be known as modus tollens, which can be summed up as a notion that if belief A leads to belief B, but if we know that belief B is false, then it must follow that belief A must be false as well. So in order to answer the question, are there any good reasons for or against theism, I'm going to kind of do something that's going to cut both ways.
How you doing?
Basically, I'll argue that if atheism is true, it would lead to certain beliefs. And by atheism, I define it as the belief that there is no God. If Skylar wants to give a different definition later, that's fine. But just for the sake of conversation, I'm letting you know how I'm defining it up front. So, first thing I want to talk about is the argument for reason, or what's sometimes referred to.
This is good. So Eric is setting the stipulation out front that he's taking atheism to mean a positive belief that there is no God, and that's going to entail certain beliefs. So that's really good, because if Skylar comes out of the gate and says, well, no, this is my definition.
And on that basis, you form the belief that it is 12 o'clock.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
But then you feel that it's really hot in your house. You see that there's water under the fridge. And then you see that the microwave is actually blinking 12 o'clock. And you come to the conclusion that, the power must have gone out.
Atheism is just a null hypothesis.
Well, I don't know. It could be 12 o'clock because, as they say, a broken clock is still right twice a day. But the point here is that if your belief that it is 12 o'clock is based on the reading of the microwave, and given that the power has went out, then you now have what's called an undercutting defeater for the validity and truth of any belief that is based on the reading of the microwave. Now, in the same principle, if there is no God and atheism is true, then the only way to explain how we got here, our existence, is by naturalistic evolution, by the mechanism of natural selection. And again, for the sake of time, that would basically mean that if our beliefs and behaviors play any role in this evolutionary process, the natural selection is going to select for adaptive behavior that are produced by beliefs which grant survival value, which is basically to say that natural selection doesn't care whether or not your beliefs are true or false. It merely cares that your beliefs help you to adapt and survive. Right. So to give an example, suppose a car is coming towards me, and I formed a belief there's a car coming towards me, and I formed a belief that in order to survive, I must jump out of the way and I'll live. So I do that. Natural selection looks at these beliefs and sees that it produces adaptive behavior and says, check, let's go ahead and pass it on because those beliefs granted and produced behavior that granted survival value in the adaptive behavior. But if a false set of beliefs could equally work and give us that survival value, then your beliefs don't have to be true for them to be passed on. So, for example, suppose I have a different set of beliefs. Same scenario. A car's coming towards me. I have the belief that I'm Superman. And if the car hits me, it will kill me. However, I want to protect my identity as Clark Kent. I don't want people to know I'm Superman, so I jump out of the way to protect my identity.
Notice how the theists have to appeal to fiction to prove their fiction.
The same type of behavior. Again, natural serious comment.
I don't want to interrupt Eric too much here, but this is really smart how he's setting this up. He's not just saying, "Hey, here's my arguments for theism," and all Skylar has to do is say, "Well, I'm not convinced," like the Dillahunting move. Eric is setting this up ahead of time to say, "Hey, listen, if you have a worldview that if it's like a naturalistic worldview or evolutionary-based worldview, that's going to entail certain beliefs, and you're going to bear a burden of proof for them." So I really like how he's setting this up from the get-go.
By this type of defeater that we have given natural selection. Now, suppose somehow Skylar could overcome this argument. I don't think he can, but let's just say that he can. Then you have to deal with another problem. That if there is no God, first of all, the most logically positioned to hold, if there is no God, and the only way we can explain our existence is through natural evolution via natural selection, then I would say the most consistent position to hold is naturalism. And this would be the idea that we have no reason to suspect anything non-physical exists, like angels, spirits, demons, souls, or anything like God, given that he's a non-physical entity. So when you apply this view of naturalism to human beings, human persons, then you get the view of physicalism, which is a view that human beings are purely physical objects
Oh,
composed
here
of
he's going. The soul and
purely
free will. I
physical
predicted at
properties
the
and
beginning,
states.
people.
Now, if that's the case, then nothing like a soul would exist, and then I would argue that if there's no soul, there can be no free will.
There it is.
To explain this, let
My
me
man
first say
Eric.
this too. Moreover, if atheism is true and there's no God, then the law of causal closure would be true. And according to the law of causal closure, every physical event must necessarily have a physical cause. Now, to explain why this is a problem, if there is no soul and there would be no free will, consider the illustration Aristotle used. He said, if I move a rock with my staff, then I know that my staff moved the rock, my hand moved the staff, but then he asked the question, what moved me? Now, I would define free will as being the originator of your will or actions. You're the first mover. So in order for free will to be possible in this situation, you have to be the first mover to move your hand, to move the staff, to move the rock. Now,
used against Eric.
You would have two options if physicalism is true at this point. You could say, well, a neuron firing in my brain caused my hand to move, to cause the staff to move, cause the rock to move. Given that that still started with me, you could say, well, I'm still the first mover, and based on the definition I gave, I'd have libertarian free will. However, given the law of causal closure, that only pushes back the goalpost, because now, given that a neuron firing was a physical event, you now have to ask yourself, and what physical event caused that neuron firing to fire?
Exactly.
At this point, I think the unbeliever would only have two options. The first option would be to, again, posit neurons firing, but then, again, you're pushing back the goalposts, and it will eventually lead to an infinite regress, which we know is logically and philosophically impossible. So the other option is that at some point, no matter how many neurons you posit that are going to fire, at some point you're going to have to point to something external and beyond yourself and prior to yourself that caused that neuron firing to fire. But once you do that and invent that, then you are no longer the originator and source first mover of your will or actions. You are now an intermediate secondary mover, and hence free will cannot exist. So I would say if there is no soul and you're just a purely physical object, then given causal closure,
this is important, by the way he's
free will
defined
can't exist
libertarian
because
free
you're not
will,
the first
because
mover of
the
your will or
definition of
actions.
libertarian
Instead,
free
you are
will,
causally
for
determined
people out
by
there, as Tim
external
Stratton defines
factors
it,
beyond your
is
control.
the ability to
Now, I
choose
don't know
among or
Skylar's position
between a
on free will,
range of
but
options,
someone
each
might say, who
compatible with
cares?
one's nature. Now, a
Well,
guy
if
like
free will
Matt
cannot
Dillahunty will
exist,
try
you're
to
also
argue
going to have to
against
give
that
up something like
by using
rational
something that's called the
responsibility and
principle of
intellectual integrity.
alternative
Here's what I mean by that.
possibilities, the PAP.
So Skylar doesn't hold to a belief in God.
And he'll say,
I would
well, we
assume he
can't
would say that
possibly
it's
test
because
that
of the
because we
evidence,
can't actually
perhaps.
know that if we
But
went
this
back in
would
time that
assume
you
a
could
type
have
of
chosen
intellectual
anything else.
integrity,
But
which is to
another
say
way
he
to say it
would be
is not
assuming
even that
he
you
was
have
free to
had to have
examine the
had the
evidence,
ability to choose
freely
something
come
else,
to
which
his
of
own
course I do
conclusion,
believe we have,
and
but just by
freely
saying you are
rationalize
the
throughout this
originator of
process.
your actions. And so long as I
However,
am
if
the originator of
given
my
what I've said
actions,
is
that I
true,
made the
and
choice,
there is no free will, there
then
can be no
that
free will if
maintains
there's no
libertarian
God,
free will. And so it's
then
important that
every
Eric's
belief that he
defined
was
it that
hold
way.
to was a belief that he was causally determined to believe by prior factors and events beyond his control, which means that his very belief that, or his lack of belief that there is no God, or his, however he wanted to hash it out, it would literally mean that these beliefs are merely beliefs that he was causally determined to believe, and he could not have believed otherwise. And for the atheist, it would literally mean that their very decision to become an atheist was not a rational, it was a non-rational, non-intellectual decision that they made, that they were determined to make and could not have made any other choice. So all the beliefs are causally determined, including the actions. So we could reiterate by saying this. Simply put, if atheism is true, or there is no God, then given the conditions I've laid out, free will cannot exist. However, if free will does exist, then it would follow atheism cannot be true. So basically, if Skylar wants to take intellectual credit for his beliefs and wants us to believe that he freely has rejected the belief in God for rational or even moral intellectual reasons, then it would also assume this was based on his ability to freely examine the evidence and freely come to his own conclusion. But if that's the case, free will exists, and therefore atheism cannot be true. Now, based on the
At
two
best, he
arguments
could
I've laid out so
affirm some
far,
kind.
it
Now, I
would
know
also
Skylar isn't
follow
going to
that,
do this, so this is
and I'm
kind of
just for the
pointless.
sake of time,
But
I can
he
unpack this
could
later. It would
affirm
follow
a type
that
of naturalism
one
that
could never
allows
rationally justify
Platonism.
the truth of their
Of course,
beliefs,
that has
and
a
without a
whole
rational
ton of problems
justification,
in
I
and
would
of
argue
itself.
that you
But
cannot have knowledge. So knowledge
Well,
would be impossible.
Platonism
So
cannot
again,
ground
we would say
agency.
that in a similar way, if atheism is true, then knowledge
no,
would be
but it
possible.
would
However,
it would buy
again,
him
if
some
Skylar
time.
wants
It
us
would
to
give
believe that he
it
knows
would throw
anything at
Eric a
all,
curveball
including
to
the
have
fact
to
that he
kind
doesn't
of
know everything, then it would
take
follow
that
that
on.
knowledge
But
Well,
I
I would say
that
you
anyway.
need a
as a
first
result, atheism cannot be
conscious
true.
agent to
Again,
solve the
even if you
infinite
could
regress
affirm that
problem, as
argument,
Braxton Hunter
then you
talks
would still
about,
have to deal with something
and
like
then to
consciousness.
be able to produce
Now,
other conscious agents
given what
as
I've
well
just
that
mentioned,
have libertarian free will.
if
Right.
atheism is true, given natural selection, naturalistic evolution, if physicalism is the most logically consistent position to take, then you would have to say that consciousness, if it exists, would have to be reducible or identical to something physical like the brain, which means that if consciousness exists, the mind is nothing more than a reducible to the brain.
Yeah.
Now, you can put it this way: if atheism is true, consciousness must be physical. But if consciousness is not physical, then atheism can't be true. Now, how do we know that consciousness is not physical? Well, based on something known as Leibniz's law of identity, which basically states if two things are questionable,
there are
they're
atheist
going to share the
idealists,
same
but
properties
you can
necessarily.
push whether that's
Give a quick
philosophically
illustration.
consistent.
Suppose I walk into a lab and I see two bottles of clear fluid.
Yeah,
One is labeled water, the other is labeled chemical X. And I ask myself, are they the same substance? Are they identical?
that's some problems
Because
I'd
in
have to
philosophy,
think about.
identical means
And
the same thing as.
it's
Well, I notice they have the same.
I mean, to say there's a conscious force, but yet it has
but then I
no
turn them over and I
agency.
see that chemical X.
Because if there's some conscious force that has awareness and so on, you might as well just call that God.
Therefore, even if I don't know what chemical X is, I know they cannot be the
maybe
same
it's
substance.
stripped of some of the classical
In the
attributes of
same
God.
way, if the mind is nothing more than a brain or reducible to it,
I don't think a Platonic force could like be conscious but not have agency at the same time.
Oh no, yeah, that's a good
thoughts
point.
and beliefs can be true or false, but no
We're
reason
finding
of
it.
my
I mean,
brain to true or
the
false.
best
My
bet
neurons
for
are
the
true or
atheist take
false.
be something
My
like
brain can weigh 3
panpsychism,
pounds, but the
where it
thought
has
that I'm
consciousness
having
at
a
like the
debate with
most
Skylar doesn't weigh 3
fundamental level
pounds.
of
My
reality.
brain can be
But
7 inches long, but the taste of
to
banana or the
you
smell
would
of a
still
rose is
have
not
that
7 inches
problem
long,
of
and
how
that's
do
in
you
my
have
mind.
this
I
immaterial
can
mind
go on and on,
interacting
but
with a
the
material body, and
principle is
so
simple.
maybe
Namely
something like
that
combination of
if
panpsychism and
all the properties of the
idealism
mind are
would be
non-physical
something
and
for
all
the
the
atheist
properties
to
of the brain are
explore.
physical, then it follows that if consciousness exists, it can't be physical. And if Skylar is conscious and consciousness is not physical, then he shouldn't be an atheist. So I just say in summation, given what I've laid out so far, we could say
Dr.
that
Josh
if Skylar
Rasmussen lays
has
it
any reason to trust
out
in his
really good in
rational
his
abilities
book,
in any
How
sense,
Reason
my
Can
first
Lead to
argument,
God.
and if he wants us to believe that he freely came to his lack of
And he
belief in God
talks
and
about
assumption of God on the basis of freely analyzing the data and following the
he
evidence
talks
freely
about
where it leads and freely coming to
direct
his
access to
conclusion.
your
My second
thoughts and your
argument,
feelings and your emotions and your identity, as Eric's
and if
laying
you
out
believe his
here.
conscience, my third argument, that
That
atheism,
kind of
the
private
belief that there is no
access
God, cannot be true. And
he's
if atheism
referring
is
to.
true,
I think
then
that's
it
kind of
must
what he's
follow that
getting at when he
therefore
talks
God
about the
must
law of
exist.
identity. Is the site like private
Thanks
access
so much,
to your
Eric.
own
We will
kind
now
of
kick it over to Skylar for his
self.
opening statement. That was just about 10
I
minutes.
think
So,
you should
Skylar,
turn
thanks
it
so much
down
for being
a
here.
little
Do
bit.
want to let you know, before you get started, Skylar, I want to mention to everybody out there, I have put the links for both of these gentlemen in the description. So that way, if you're listening and you're like, I like
Turns
that,
out a little bit,
you can
but
hear
I do
plenty
want to be able to
more
hear Skylar
just by
so I can
clicking on those
comment on what he
links
said.
below. Also, want to let
just
you know,
like
as I mentioned,
it's hard for me to
we
think
are a
straight and
nonpartisan
like
platform, and we
and it
though
may
we
be
are
confusing
pretty
for the
laissez
audience or
faire in the
distracting
sense that we
perhaps,
only
but
have like one
maybe
strict
they
rule,
maybe,
which is no hate speech. Like that'll
maybe
get
you could ask
banned,
them what they
deleted,
want.
obviously.
Oh
We do
no,
want to
James!
ask,
Don't start talking
and I
about
think
hate speech.
99% of you do a superb
Like I
job
know
at
what
this
he's
already,
talking about. He's
which
talking
I
about don't
just
be
give
a
you
jerk.
huge thanks for. Is that you
Don't be
your friendly
excessively like
selves? As sometimes
disrespectful
once in
or
a while
curse
it
at
gets
people.
kind of
But oh man, that term
heated in
hate
live
speech.
chat,
Like
and we're kind of
don't.
like, hey, we'll be patient, and
I'll
we're not
talk to
going to
him
be like
later.
super strict on
There's
this.
no such thing
But
as
we
hate
ask,
speech.
come on, meet
Just
us
say
halfway.
don't be an
We're pretty
ass.
laissez-faire. So with that, very excited to hear from Skylar. Appreciate both of you being here, gentlemen. And Skylar, the floor is all yours.
Hey, everybody. Bear with me tonight, folks. I got a little food poison this week. I am not feeling the best I've ever felt. So, but let me jump into this, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is I wish you'd just taken a little time to go look at my channel because I'm not an atheist, right? So a lot of what your argument was based towards was that I'm an atheist that declares that there is no God. I don't know if there's a God. I really don't. Actually,
he went through
I
a
kind of
couple
hope that there
things.
is,
He went
to be
through.
honest with you.
He kind of used it synonymous with
well, it
naturalism
depends
and
on the kind of God
evolutionism, which
I should really
is
kind of
important.
preface that with, because if he's like the God from the Old Testament, that God, I don't want that. But other than that, I would say that I'm not an atheist.
There
so
is the Old Testament stuff. I talked about that at the beginning too.
To me. I would also say that what you're kind of doing is you're kind of leaving like the law of excluded middle. Basically, you're doing a similar thing that Matt Slick does, where you create an either or, but it's a false dichotomy.
Wait, is this your opening or rebuttal to my position? I thought you were going to give an opening.
Why are we interrupting me? Like seriously, dude. Like that's not cool.
We technically hadn't agreed. This is, I know that it's usually customary that in the openings people don't address the opening of the other, but at the same time, it's something we didn't really actually make explicit, and so it's something that I wouldn't say we could assume, because we're like I said, pretty easygoing here. So we will.
This happens every time. I swear, I'm gonna talk to somebody.
Well,
dude,
all
right, look, can I go back to my time, my man?
On.
Listen, here's the deal. You can get lost. Just be quietly lost, right? Don't be rude and interrupt the conversation.
Wow. Already started.
You're still talking over me.
Oh man.
So can I start over with my time? Is that okay?
I can give you the it's probably like 30 seconds. So I'll give you 30
Sure.
seconds
Now here's
back.
the thing.
so
I
you
will
got,
say Eric
about
should
9
not have
minutes.
said anything.
Sure. If you would, please just mute yourself, Eric, if you can't
But
help
it
yourself
just goes
during
to
these
show you how
conversations.
quickly Skylar's
So
willing
the
to
deal
take
is,
something as a
you know,
question
I
and,
can open and
make
say
it
whatever I'd
hostile
like
when
in
it
my
wasn't.
right? You're not here to dictate what I'm going to say. I wasn't even going to do a very long opening, but now I'll go the whole 10 minutes for you, Eric, and I'll say a lot of things that maybe you will just disagree with. But anyways, let me go back to go over some of your points here. So I'm not an atheist, which you got wrong, and you made almost a whole complete argument about. I'm not even in with naturalism. You know, I'm open to the supernatural. I
No, he's
wouldn't
not.
necessarily exclude the supernatural as possible. Right? I don't see any evidence for it right now. So this kind of dichotomy, you're going to be like naturalism versus non-naturalism.
But here's the thing: it is a
dichotomy
dichotomy if you're talking about explanations. What
made a lot
Skylar
of,
wants
like,
to do, and this is
assertions
why
during this thing
Eric
about
set it up
free
like this in
wills
the
and
beginning,
there's no
was to
free
try
will,
to
there's no
kind of
soul,
preemptively go
doesn't
against
matter
this
to
whole
me. I
thing
never
when
really
you
thought about
define
determinism
atheism
enough.
as kind of this lack theism,
Really have
that
a
I just lack
position
a
on it.
belief.
It's not
You
interesting to
think
me.
that you can
It
have
made
the
me,
middle of the
like,
road
during
where
that
it's like, well, I
opening,
don't
though,
know the
like, it
explanation,
took
but I
so
can
long
critique
for us to
God.
actually get
And it actually
to,
turns
like,
out
an
if we're
argument
we're
here.
having a discussion, like the
And I
topic
didn't hear any
is
kind of definition
arguments
of,
or
like,
evidence
theism,
for
like what kind
theism.
of God this, like
There is
how
kind
you're
of this.
defining
You
this
don't have. There
general
isn't
open
a
God.
middle
There are different
ground
types of
to.
theism out
Is
there.
the explanation a theistic one or a
I
non-theistic
don't know
one?
how you're
There's not a
connecting.
partial
I don't
theistic
know what attributes
explanation,
this
and so
God
that's what
has that
Eric
you're
was
connecting
talking
with all
about.
these
And
things
so
that
when
you're
he's saying
talking
you
about
just
within
exclude
your
this middle
arguments.
ground,
I
well,
didn't hear any of
what
that
he's
in
talking
there.
about is what he wants to be able to do with this kind of
I think you
I
make a lot
don't
of
know, or I can
category
kind of obfuscate or the
errors,
evidence or whatever
especially when
it's
you do
going to
things
be.
like some things depending. Yeah, here's what I'm gonna say. You were saying about like brains and consciousness. How, like, if you know, a thought is not the same thing as a brain, and since they're not the same thing, like the law of identity. But a lot of this comes down to the idea of how we define things, right? So how do we identify something? Like how do we identify a person, right? People have specific definitions for this. It may be different. My specific definition may be different from yours, right? So when we get into these ideas of the law of identity, we're really going to have to get in the weeds here and talk about how we're identifying and how these things are different or alike depending on how we identify them. I think also, what else I got here in my notes here? A lot of categorization. I think the consciousness thing is really interesting. I watched a lot of your videos. You pretty much made these same
Amen,
arguments.
Brad.
He jumped
Amen.
in his conversation. I think that when you look at, if you think you've solved the problem of consciousness, you should write a book and get rich and famous, my man, because this is a thing that has not been solved. Same with the problem of identity.
Atheists love to do this.
Simply just stating,
I honestly think it's one of the
because
dumbest
the
things
atheist,
I
I'm
hear.
not even an atheist.
I'm not
I'm
attacking
open to it. I'm
Skyler.
open to
I'm
ideas.
friends with
How long?
Skyler.
How much time I got left, James? How am I
But,
doing?
like, collect your Nobel Peace Prize.
Got
That's
about
not
6 minutes, 12
So-
seconds.
I don't think Skylar had
12 seconds.
an
All
opening
right.
statement because
So I would hope. I wonder if when we get to the actual back and forth, I wonder if you have any.
Yeah,
I love to
he
see these
is
arguments
just
totally
for
he
money.
didn't
like,
even present an
premises.
opening
We can go step
statement.
by step
Like seriously.
with it. Yeah, I'll concede the rest of my time. I'm good to go.
Gotcha. We will jump into open conversation, folks. Thanks so much. And as I mentioned, you can
Oh, so
shoot
there's not
a
rebuttals.
question
Okay,
into the
cool.
live chat.
So
and tag
this
me
will be
with
fun.
@Modern Day Debate. Makes it easier for me to try to add everyone to the list for the Q&A. And with that, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so and James apologized. I guess there wasn't any set parameters. I thought there was, and it's not James' fault or your fault. And the only reason I interrupted is because I thought you were going to give an opening. So far, I haven't heard you address the topic of the debate. Are there any good arguments for or against theism? Now, as an agnostic, you should say no. Which I guess so. You would agree with me that there are no good arguments for atheism. And if I would define, or we can just call it the belief that there is no God. Would you agree with me?
Wait a minute. You said two things. You said the definition of atheism, the belief that there is no God. Well,
No.
I'm not an atheist with
Okay,
that
no.
definition. Yeah.
Let me reword it. So,
Yeah.
would you agree with me that there are no good
Oh.
arguments for the proposition there is no God?
There is no God. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of people saying, especially if you don't know what, because you have to define what the God is in a sense, right? There could be
Yes or
100
no?
different types of God. Well, I'm trying to give a more detailed answer so you can actually understand what I'm saying. Be a little charitable, man. You don't want me to get aggressive. I'm trying to be chill and peaceful tonight, man. Just chill a little bit. So the thing is, when you talk about this, when you talk about good arguments, yes, if an atheist just makes the argument, there's
I
no
hope this isn't a
possibility
repeat
that
of
there's any type of
Skylar and
God.
Trent,
It's a shitty argument,
because
in my opinion.
the
Now,
thing is,
unless
like,
we
when
get
you
into
have
the
a
detail,
hothead
now
like
when you get into the
Skylar, but then you
details
have
of
someone like
particular
Eric
gods,
who's like
then
a
I
no
think you can make
nonsense kind
arguments
of
and show
guy,
how the
there can be
particular
some kind
gods
of miscommunication where, like,
and incoherent.
Neither of them are
So I guess your answer
trying
would
to
be
be
yes, you agree
jerks,
with
but
me
like
that there are
because
no
they
good
both have
arguments for
kind
the
of this,
position, there is no
they
God.
almost radiate this kind of sense of, I don't want to say
answered
hostility,
your
but you know what I
question,
mean. Just
If
two
you can't
people who
follow, I
like
don't know
that
what you want to do.
clash.
Right. No, I'm summing up what you said, and then I just and if,
Sure.
if I'm
Go on. What's your next point?
no, I'm asking.
Yeah,
So,
I'll repeat myself again.
Why does
I think that when people say that I would say there's no good arguments to say that there's no possibility that there's any type of God. Yes, that's what I said the first time. But go ahead.
okay, and I'm curious why is that? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, because there's so many variables involved, and there's so much that we can't know as human beings, right?
Like
Like,
what?
well, I mean, what do you mean? Like, there's all types of things that I'm limited to by my knowledge. My knowledge is pretty much limited to here on Earth. Anything out of this realm, and then I don't even have even a fraction of the knowledge or information that is here with it. So, like, there could be all types of different ideas and concepts of gods. I mean, it's happened throughout our human history. You see all the different concepts of gods. And by the way, I do think I'm not one of these people who think that there are no good arguments for some kind of generic God. I was a deist for a long time. I have a lot of actually appreciation for people who are deists and some of those beliefs. So I'm not necessarily completely one of these people who say that there are no good arguments. I just haven't heard them. YouTube apologists, I should say.
So you do think there are good arguments for deism?
I think there are ones that are interesting and compelling to me personally. Good is kind of subjective to my own opinion. So yeah, there are things that I find more pleasing and I think more honest. I think I'm amazed, to be honest with you, when I look around the world and how incredible it is and where we are and the things that exist. Like, to me, that is very it gives me a sense of wonder that I appreciate. That's what I would say. And that's why I was a deist for so long. There's a lot of things.
Yeah. So and to respond, so again, I wasn't necessarily calling you an atheist. I'm saying if there is no God, and I said I'm going to use the word atheism as there is no God, and I said Skylar could define it however he wants later. So it wasn't an attack against per se you being an atheist. I'm saying if atheism is true,
I think a good question for Eric to ask
so that would answer the topic.
is the argument
not
for
an
free
atheist,
will and the argument from reason good evidence for God?
The point is, if there's no God,
there's
And
good
if he
evidence,
says
right?
no,
We don't
then
know.
that's
I
where
don't
the
know.
conversation
It might be one.
I don't know if you're getting me here. So if A implies B,
Maybe
but
I'm
B
not
false,
being clear.
Yeah. If A implies,
don't say it like that. Say it another way. I don't understand what you're saying by A. What's another way of saying it?
if a belief implies another belief, but that implied belief is false, then it follows that base belief must be false as well. So and I'm curious.
I don't understand how that relates to me. So what am I doing there? So I don't understand how that relates. What you just said relates to me specifically.
He's talking about why he
I'm
structured this open.
explaining the reason I was using, because you accused me of kind of, I guess, not really addressing it or addressing you, and I'm telling you the reasoning behind my arguments.
Okay. All right. Where are you at? Go ahead. Go to your next point.
Okay. So given this, that we have that if there's no God, so this, then I guess then it would be helpful to interact with some of the things that I was saying. So, for example, let's go with free will. I mean, do you believe that you were free to come to the beliefs that you have?
I have comments I
It
want to make,
seems
but
that way. I don't have a. I haven't
interrupt
thought
this
about it enough to
part
give
here
you a
'cause I'm
definite
interested to see
decision that
how
I'm going to
Eric
die
walks
on, or
into
a
this.
hill I'm going to die on, or argue over.
Why haven't you thought about it?
I got too much shit going on in life. I got 2
What?
children, a full-time job, a life,
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah. That's kind of my point. You do this for a living, and yet you haven't thought about that.
Oh, I don't do this for a living. This isn't my main job. I make some money off of this, but this is what I do with my main man, Dr. Josh Bowen. At night, we discuss.
See, here's the
theology,
thing:
we have
is
fun.
Eric set it up
takes
as, "Hey,
nothing
here's
to
my
make a
argument,
YouTube
and if
video.
you're
This is
going
really hard
to
work. I got a
negate
nice
the
mic and a
proposition that
video.
there's a God, this is what it would entail, and that's why
Okay.
it was
Yeah, but
and then
also,
Skylar wants to
there's
throw
lots
that
of-
and
I
say,
have
"Well, you're not
specialty
arguing
fields
against
that I work.
me
Like, I focus on
because I believe
morality.
X, Y, and Z, and
We
I think
focus on
there's
Old
middle ground,
Testament
and I'm not
ethics.
sure. Maybe there's good
There's
argument,
a
maybe there's not." And what he wants to
huge,
do
when you
is
talk
get
about
away from
philosophy or
if
any
the arguments
topic,
point to anything
right?
objective and just talk
People have
about what
specializations
convinces
in
him, and
particular
that's not
areas,
how this
typically
works.
because they enjoy those particular areas. They study, they focus on the
I feel
particular
like
areas.
I would
But
ask Skylar, what is your
that's
view
why I
of the
have the
human
way
body?
that
Is
I
it
am.
just
So,
material,
I guess
or is there
so-
actual
so
consciousness
would you agree
to
with me that whether or not
this
God
agency
exists
when it
has
comes
a
from
lot of
consciousness? And if he sort of denies that consciousness is not the brain,
It could,
or apart from the
it could
brain,
not.
in
I mean,
some
depending on
sense,
how active this God is with us,
or fundamental in the
he's just some
idealist
God who
sense, but
created everything and
idealism would be
disappeared.
above his head, I think.
Kind of like
Oh,
the God
yeah.
of the Old Testament.
No,
Like,
he's not.
but if he's like that, where he just kind of
I
abandoned
think
us,
if
there
he
really wouldn't have any
is a
implications on daily
materialist when it
life or
comes to
what's happening.
human human body
okay,
and
so, like, the arguments I
human
gave,
put an
let's say that
identity, then
you have
then the argument
belief
of
brain
free will would work
produces
against his position.
No, I'd say it's a pretty
I'm
good
sorry, you
implication.
cut out. Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
That, like, the first argument I gave, that if there is no God, then you have an undercutting defeater for the rational justification of truth of any belief your brain produces. That would be a pretty big implication, wouldn't you agree?
I don't know what you mean by that. I need you to kind of clarify and really flush that out.
I think it's over his head.
So, remember the illustration
Yeah.
I gave about the reading of the microwave. If I look at the microwave and believe it's 12 o'clock because the microwave says so, but I realize the power went out, then I now
Sure.
have something that undercuts the validity or justification of my belief, given it's based on the reading of the microwave.
Sure. Okay. So I get that point. What's the next point?
So in the argument, the next thing I went to was that if we look at our cognitive faculties and our beliefs, and given natural selection, our beliefs are going to aim for survival value, then it could care less for the truth value, which means as long as your beliefs produce adaptive behavior, that's all natural selection would care about. So
Well, that's assuming that that's the case, that that's the only reason that our thoughts we do that. That's kind of an assertion you would have to kind of demonstrate, wouldn't you?
Well, I don't know.
He made an argument for that. He made an argument for
Patricia Churchland, who says that
if there
when it
is no
comes to evolution,
immaterial
there's only
soul.
4 Fs. There's fighting, fleeing, feeding, and reproducing. There's kind
This is
of
another
a
thing
joke there.
atheists like to do with when it
So,
comes to morality. They always say,
in
well,
fact, she
until you've
says,
refuted every
she
single
an evolutionist,
naturalistic
this
moral
person?
theory, you can't
She's a
just assert
philosopher,
God.
philosopher of science. So
And
she's
that's
an
not how that
No.
works.
No,
That's
she's
what- that's
okay.
what
Are
she's
you an
trying to play
evolutionist?
here.
Yes.
Do you believe in evolution?
No.
No. Okay, you're young Earth creationist.
I don't take a position on that. I haven't honestly studied it.
Okay,
much,
that's
so
fair
I-
enough. That's good. Okay, so
so,
you don't believe in evolution. It helps me understand what your position is, so where you're
Yeah.
coming from.
Yeah, no. So I don't believe in naturalistic evolution.
Mhm.
So she says, and she's an atheist philosopher, says, boiled down to the essentials, a nervous system enables an organism to succeed in the 4 Fs, and she names
So he's basically
principal
saying he
core of the
doesn't
nervous
take
system
man's
to be
word
the
over
body
God's.
parts in the right place where
Exactly.
they should be in order for that the organism may survive. Truth, whatever it is, definitely takes the hindmost. So this is not my opinion or my assertion. This is something that people have thought through. And
Sure, survival means a lot of different things, though. I mean, people become more intelligent to survive. Like this term survival has a lot more built into it. Now, is your degree in like you have a science degree within biology?
Here we
evolution,
go.
or anything
Appeal
like
to
that?
authority.
But then I'm not really going to get too deep into a conversation with you because I don't know a lot about it. You're not qualified.
but you're going to
you
talk
don't have an
theology with
education.
me. And
Yeah.
Yeah, we can talk theology. Yeah,
Oh.
because I've studied
Oh,
theology.
he's not qualified.
Yeah, I
You're
actually
in it?
studied some of this stuff. Yeah, I was doing an apprenticeship to become a minister, bro.
What degree do you have in theology?
I don't have a degree. I don't need to study
Okay,
theology.
so then it's irrelevant.
Not in the level.
So,
Oh no,
so
it's
then
relevant. No, because here, let me tell you why.
I'm
it's
sorry,
relevant.
but like
No,
theology,
I'm gonna tell you why it's relevant.
I think because atheists who
You tell
don't
me
have
you don't believe in
degrees or
evolution, when
actually read
99% of
church
the
fathers
scientists
or
do.
church history
There
or
it
the
is.
exact theology book.
Now,
The 99, so
are
if
definitely not
99% of the
qualified
doctors
at all.
told you to have a certain
Right.
treatment, and 1% of the doctors like not do the treatment, you're gonna go with the 99% of the doctors. Do you trust the people who are educated in that issue?
so let me-
I don't know evolution, so I don't know if this is actually true what you're arguing. You're not. I don't believe
He's
you're
saying,
qualified
saying,
to
oh,
even argue this.
but how many?
So,
I think this is what you just
I
said,
don't know
John.
what
I was
you want
having a
me to do
hard
with
time
that.
hearing
I
you.
don't know if I disagree with you.
Skylar,
I
but
heard
like,
T-Jump actually had
how
different
many-
answers.
like
There's
if
all types of things.
Skylar fictions because
that
say,
you
well, I
didn't
study
necessarily
theology
agree
and I
with. Go
disagree
ahead.
with all the theologians. Therefore,
okay, yeah,
I
I
can
don't know
talk
how that's
about this.
relevant.
But you
So
can't
this
talk
isn't,
about science
quote,
if you
my
disagree with all the
argument. This is an
scientists.
argument that people have developed and people who study this stuff. And there's
So
people,
I can appeal to
who would agree
authority,
with
but
this
you
and
can't.
agree with these conclusions.
Which
But
Eric
Patricia
wasn't even doing,
Churchland
by
is
the way. He was
mostly
just
widely
discussing
agreed that
science.
that's the mechanism of natural selection. That's what it does. It aims for survival value. And these are philosophical arguments, not scientific arguments. So I'm saying, for the sake of argument, if this were true, this would be the conclusion.
You break it up.
So this is,
Shit. Shit.
so I'm where did I leave off at?
So okay, all right. So you were saying so people have these survival instincts, right? And their thoughts. Repeat your phrase, and we'll go into it. You said a lot. I'm trying to keep up with you, but you kind of said a lot of different things in your first argument in 10 minutes.
No,
You have
no,
like
yeah,
three
no.
different arguments built in one. Yeah.
And I appreciate you asking for clarification. What is the last thing you heard me say? So I know.
I
where
feel like
It had to do
opponents here
with the
could have
idea
studied
of
each other's positions better
people,
before the debate.
the idea of survival.
What'd you say,
mode,
John?
Basically,
I said
and
I
how
feel
their
like
thoughts
both
are
Eric and
connected with
Skylar
survival.
could have studied each other's positions better
well,
before this
did you hear me
debate, unless
say
it was
that
like
my
so
Absolutely,
sudden.
argument
but
is not a
at the
scientific
very least,
argument, it's a
like
philosophical argument on the basis of people who've done the studying and done the research. So it's not like I'm
That-
making these
yeah.
assertions. These are arguments, and that even
that's fair,
atheists,
but either way,
scientists, and
like,
philosophers would agree with. So it's
sounds to
widely
me
accepted
like
that natural selection aims for survival value. I
Eric
don't
wants to
even
talk
know
about
what
these
it
arguments, and
means.
Skylar just wants to talk about
I'm
what's
not necessarily
subjectively
disagreeing with that. I'm
convincing.
just saying that but there are a lot of ways that it does that. It isn't just when you talk about survival. There's a lot of ways. And adaptation is really what we're talking about. These adaptations with changing. There's a lot of ways people adapt and survive. So let's go back to your main argument.
So
Keep
yes,
going with your argument.
for example, you
I'm
can
gonna
make
just
the
for the
argument
sake of
that
the
yes,
argument, I'm
a
gonna set
true
your
belief in a given
premise,
circumstance
and let's keep
would
going.
would
I
aid
just
to
wanna make sure
survival,
I'm
and
understanding,
Eric's
because
but Eric's
again,
point would
I'm not
still
I'm not
hold because it
so in
would
other
say,
words,
well,
our teeth
you
and our
don't actually
nails,
know
we
which
have
ones,
those
which
given natural
beliefs you've adapted
evolution
that are true
because it's helped us
and
survive
aided
and adapt,
survival, and
right?
which ones
You
aided
said we
survival
have
because they
what?
were false. You couldn't
Like
distinguish
our
them.
teeth and our nails, those are things that we have evolved to help us survive.
I would imagine. I don't know. I haven't studied the field.
Okay.
I know
So
our brains have we've become smarter. That's one thing.
well, I guess that's kind of what the argument touches on, is that if
Okay.
anything, we can trust that our beliefs are aimed and produce beliefs that are geared for survival value, not necessarily truth value, which means your beliefs don't necessarily have to be true, and these beliefs will be passed on.
Oh,
throughout the
sure. That's fair. I agree with your premise. Okay.
Okay, right. So I'm saying
Okay.
if that's the case, then you now have an undercutting defeater for any belief your brain produces, much like the illustration about the microwave.
And now that I don't know where you're getting to that conclusion there. So are you saying that no conclusion my brain comes to can be true now?
No, I'm saying it's now undercutted. It's an undercutting defeater. So in other words, when I look at the
I don't-
microwave and it blinks 12 o'clock, it could be 12 o'clock, but I have no way to justify it if all I'm using is a microwave.
Sure, but stay in my mind. I'm trying to figure out how this works with my mind here.
Right.
So how are you saying that now? Are you saying I can't have knowledge? Is this what's your overall point here? Are we going to get to like brain in a vat type things? Is that what's going to where
Not
we're going to
justified
end up here?
knowledge. You can't.
No. So
Okay.
So that was the first point. Is simply that you now have an undercutting defeater, so you can't justify any. You cannot.
No, I don't. That's what I'm asking you to justify. I don't understand what. Okay.
How many people are
do I
watching
have a
the
defeater?
debate?
What about?
Say it again.
What gives?
How many people are
What
watching
about having a
debate?
The actual debate
A
is
brain.
being watched by
that interprets information?
Let's check here.
What is the defeater?
So basically, we
289 people watching
not
the
a
actual
mechanism
debate.
designed
I don't know how many are watching on this channel.
There's only like
It
9.
cut out again. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's my internet
thanks.
or the internet out there. I apologize, guys. What was your last statement?
Would you agree with me that the brain is not a mechanism designed to obtain truth?
Well, I don't think the brain is designed.
Right. So your answer is yes. You would agree with me, right?
Well, yeah. Well, yes,
Okay,
because
right.
it's not designed. Yeah.
Right. So,
But the brain can recognize truth.
But see,
well,
this
that
is
would
Eric's
go to my
argument.
about
It's like,
consciousness. I don't think
yes, your
brain
brain
thinks at all,
could
but
recognize truth
that's
because they
further down
aided
the road.
to
When we
survival,
go
but
back-
it also might recognize falsehood
I
as
think that's going
truth
to be the root of it.
because it
if
aids
you're
to
saying that,
survival. And the point is yes, that's
consciousness, obviously-
undercutting because
Obviously, no one
you
solved the problem.
couldn't
Consciousness.
distinguish that again unless you had free will, but then that would entail
people study
theism
this think
too.
it actually comes from the brain.
My question
and
is,
it's very obvious when people get brain damage.
without using the brain,
Their mind goes away.
demonstrating- I don't want to sound like an
there's
atheist,
diseases
but
that
you
affect
can't
the brain.
Hold on, I'm turning this
that
down a little bit
affect
so I
the
can hear
mind.
you better, John.
What's the mind?
My question would be,
Depends,
what
it's a complicated way
rearrangement
you
of
can use your mind
molecules
and consciousness the same thing.
allows for the pursuit of
It's
truth?
a loose
Exactly.
term, a
Recognized
loose
truth.
definition, because like I said, this is something philosophers have been debating over for centuries. There isn't a real definition, but my definition would basically be the idea that a brain consciousness is the way the brain perceives its own functions in a flawed way.
Okay, so it's a type of perception.
Mhm.
Right.
Because
okay.
everything's in the brain. The consciousness, I believe, the consciousness comes from the brain. You don't see consciousness or brains or consciousness without brains. You get brain damage, your mind is can be destroyed. You see this.
How do you see
people
consciousness at all?
Well, it's awareness. It depends on how you define consciousness. How do you define consciousness?
Yeah, so consciousness is comes in 5 states. It's something you define ostensibly. So the 5 states would be thoughts, beliefs, sensations, desires, and volition or acts of will. So that would be how you would define consciousness.
You said acts of will. What were the other ones?
So thoughts, beliefs, sensations, desires, and volition, or you can also say acts of will. Interchangeable.
So none of those come from the brain.
Skylar,
you believe?
I think Eric.
No.
So you don't think
Well,
human desires, emotions, none of that comes from the brain?
Let me rephrase that.
What'd you say, John?
I
To be fair to
believe the brain
Skylar,
can
I think
influence things. I don't
Eric
think
is so
things can
used
go in
to
the brain.
his own,
Well, how would the
arguments
brain
that he talks a
influence
bit
something
too
that's
fast.
apart from it?
Right. Yeah.
How would the brain influence something that's apart
That
from it? Well,
makes
you have a cause and
The type
effect
of person he
relationship.
is.
So I'm not a part of a guitar, but I can tune it or detune it. But it doesn't follow that the music.
Yeah, but
is
how
inside the
does it?
guitar.
But I don't understand. How does it interact? What's the mechanism?
Right. So even if I couldn't explain the mechanism, so I think, well, let me give.
Well, you can't. Truthfully, to be honest, you just can't.
Let me.
If you want to be honest with, yeah.
Let me give a two-part answer to this. So first, I'd say that it's a primitive action. What's called a basic
I honestly
action.
think almost
Because
a mechanism
when you
may
ask me
be
how does
a
it
category error when
interact, you're
attacking the
basically
soul
asking for
or
an
mentality, because
intermediate mechanism.
it's something that
So
is.
if I say, how does
simple.
A interact with B?
We can give a
you
model
say,
with
well,
how
I could say, well, C. Well, then you can just ask,
the
well, how does
the
A
mind
interact
interacts with the
interact
brain.
B?
But like,
At some
if you're
point,
asking for a
again, you're going to
physical
get to an
mechanism
infinite
or
regress. So there has to
demonstration
be a
of that
stopping
model
point. And I would say
or an
that
observation,
there's
I
I'm
don't
talking
think
about the
you're
immediate
getting that,
mechanism,
because
man.
I
You don't
think
have
just
to
like
go
when
back
people
that,
ask for
because
scientific
what's
evidence
the
of
immediate?
God or
How
just
does a brain
stuff like that, I think it's just a
influence
category error.
a
Right.
mind that's not connected to the brain?
right. So let me finish my
But
thought. I think it's
idealism
just a
actually could
primitive
solve
action. It's a
the
direct action.
interaction
How?
problem
I
and
can say, I don't
hierarchical
know.
dualism.
But I could say that I do believe it's a basic action. But I don't come to the belief the soul exists because I guess that can explain the interaction problem. On top of that, if we
Well,
have
the soul is a
if
Christian
we-
concept. That's not
No,
necessarily
it's not.
general theism.
No, it's not.
What does the soul have to do with theism? General God belief.
Well, wait.
You have to believe
you
it?
just
What kind of theism are you defining? What kind of theism are you talking about? There's different classical theism, like what?
Well, considering the first
I'm
real
talking about
philosophical
a belief
theists,
first and
the
foremost
Greeks,
that
Socrates,
there is
Plato,
more to
Aristotle,
the
believed in the
to the
soul.
natural world. There's
I
more
don't
to
think
the
it's strictly a
universe
Christian
to
idea.
life than just purely physical states and properties.
No problem, but you're talking about a soul,
Okay.
and that's not
Right.
that's
No,
something
okay.
different.
Well,
Okay,
I'm
I get
going
it. Yes, that a soul could be included in that. I get it.
I'm
But how do you get to a soul from general theism?
I'm going one step at a time for you because I don't want you to say that I'm going too fast or anything. So that was just my first point that it points to. Now, if that's the case, I would argue that if atheism is true,
Wait, you're not answering my question. You're not answering my question, though. You're going back to something else. So you don't know how a soul interacts with the brain, right? You said it affects the brain, but you can't tell me how it interacts. You're claiming a soul is connected to theism somehow now. And now what are we doing? We're going to move to another topic? We're going to move to something else? Where are we going?
We're going to hopefully get to the end of a sentence for me before you interrupt again.
I hope so.
Dang.
Get to the point.
I hope so.
If you're more, I would say.
Let's hear from Eric of what the question. If you want to repeat the question, Skyler, but otherwise, if you remember the question, we'll let you answer it.
Yeah. So he has two.
I remember when
First one
James
was
used
about
to
the
use a blue
interaction
yoga
problem.
mat
Even
for his
said, allow me
background.
to get to
Right?
the part
I know.
First,
I
think
do
it's just a
too.
primitive, a basic
Good for
action.
James upgrading.
Now,
That's my
another
boy.
thing I'd say, the second part to that answer, I'd say is even if I don't know how, if I can't explain the metaphysical mechanism by which it happens, I don't believe in a soul because I can.
You can
solve
still
the
recognize
interaction
that there's
problem. I believe in
obviously a
soul for other
relationship
reasons that aren't
just
Yeah,
by
evident.
using intuition.
and that
when you ask
consciousness
about
is
the
an actual
interaction problem,
property.
you're
Because
asking
if you,
an
unless
epistemic question of
if you
how,
can't give
and I'm
the
answering
mechanism for how the
ontological
brain
question of whether or
produces
not it exists
the
in the first
mind, then
place.
that's
So
an even
if I
bigger
can give
problem.
arguments that it exists,
But
and those arguments
I think as an
successful, then it
epistemological
follows the soul exists,
standard
even if I
of
don't know how
to
it
say
interacts.
something is
I don't
true,
know
you
how
have to have
my
a
car
physical
works, but I can
mechanism
still
or
drive
some
it.
sort of mechanism with how it works.
Okay.
What's the
I want to
mechanism
go back
of
to the
quantum
points that I made about
mechanics?
the soul.
There is
Right.
How do you
there is
connect the
none
soul
of
with
classical
theism?
mechanics. It's unpredictable. So perhaps
Is this just your
something like
personal
that.
definition of theism that you include a soul in there?
Oh, theism, right. So the first part was to argue that if the soul exists, then you're going to have to give up naturalism or physicalism. I'm not saying you hold to it. I'm just saying in general.
That's not what I'm asking you right now. That's not what I'm
He's
asking
leading
you.
into it.
I'm asking you how you connect soul with theism.
I understand.
And you're repeating
that,
what you're doing is you're repeating what you've done so far. I know what you've done so far. I've already heard it. People wonder why I interrupt. It's because you're kind of repeating yourself. Just a direct answer would be nice. Go ahead.
So I'm getting there, if you would allow me to. So if we first give up, in other words, it's a step-by-step process. If there's more to the natural world, and if, according to atheism, only physical things would exist, which I would argue that is the most logically positioned to take, and if the belief that there is no God leads to that belief, and there are non-physical things that exist, and it follows that some God must exist. So to answer the question on the topic of the debate, it would
If
follow
there is
yes
a
or
immaterial
arguments for
soul, then
theism,
some
and that
God
would
must
cut
exist
both
to
ways and
explain it.
say
That's how
that
they're
would actually
related.
disprove atheism, or whatever
What's
you
the
want to call it,
mechanism
believe
for
there is no
matter
God.
taking up space? Well, just expand.
I
Okay, what's the
don't
mechanism
have
for that?
that belief. Why are you
It
bringing
just
up
fine.
atheism? It's not relevant to
I
me.
think it would be fair to say
So,
if
like, my arguments aren't.
good
I'm
arguments
not
for
focusing
soul,
around atheism.
then
I
it
asked you a
does
question
that.
about the soul, and you didn't answer it. You're just
What was
saying, listen, you're
He is
you don't
answering. See,
remember
here's
what
the
my question
thing:
was?
is
About
After
the
you just
soul?
Yes.
Skylar,
my
when if
specific question
Eric
to
brings
you.
up atheism,
Well, you
Skylar
asked
says,
too.
"Well,
You
you're not
asked
addressing me or
interaction
my
problem, and you
question
asked
because
how
I'm
it
not an
relates to
atheist."
And I
But what
explained
Eric
to you
is doing
that
is
if
That's not,
atheism,
no, I
he's
know how
answering the
you're
question because
relating it to
he's
theism.
asking
I'm
how it
asking
relates
how
to
you're
theism.
connecting it to theism and saying this is part of general theism as a definition.
And in order to do that, you
right,
have
so
to
I'm
rule
not
out
saying it's part of
atheism.
general theism as a definition per
Okay,
se.
so this is your personal definition of theism then. So we might as well just argue Christianity if we're going to do this. If we're just going to throw our
He wants to argue
definition
Christianity. That's
of
what he
what we
wants to
think
do, so
God
he can just
is.
pull out verses in the
So
Old
I'm arguing
Testament
against
and say
atheism,
God is evil.
which I would define as a belief there is no God. Obviously, if
No
we
one's
believe,
making here.
if
Hold on one
if
second. Go ahead, Eric.
if the belief there is no God is false, then that would imply the opposite. There is a God. Now
Exactly.
we can then go. If that's the case, then we've answered the topic in discussion for debate, which I haven't even heard you answer, by the way. So your personal beliefs aren't relevant to my arguments. It's not as if like I'm not attacking you per se.
son.
I'm attacking the belief in general that there is no God. And if the belief that there is no God is false, then it must follow that there is a God.
I mean, all you're saying is if there's a God, atheism isn't true. Well, yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm saying,
Yeah,
I'm saying,
yes, I agree, but that's a tautology. I get it. So what's the
No.
Yeah,
point?
but
The
he's
same
saying
thing.
hey,
It's the
here's
same
these
thing.
pieces of evidence, like a
If there's
soul,
a God, there's no
that
atheism.
show that
Obviously, if you
atheism
define
is
atheism,
false.
there is
Therefore,
no God. Someone
God
claim there's no
exists.
gods. Yes, if there's a God, atheism is correct. But you're not. But you haven't actually made an argument to prove the existence of this
Yes, he has.
theistic
And
God.
all
that
you
you've
wanted to do
attached
is
a soul
obfuscate and
to
say, well,
somehow.
it's about my
How-
beliefs, and I'm an
It's from
agnostic, not an
Christianity,
atheist.
but you don't want to argue Christianity tonight.
Are you familiar with modus tollens? Are you familiar with that phrase? That rule of
Oh,
logic?
snap. He's about to drop some logic on him.
The term before. I am not a philosophy major. I don't focus on philosophy. Not my thing. That's why originally when I asked James,
When people in general
I
say
don't think
it's
you
not
want
my
to discuss
thing,
Christianity,
it's
you
not
want to discuss
important.
general theism. I usually argue Christianity with people because
they
we
don't
have like a real topic with me. But we
I
should
think
keep on. I
everyone
don't want people to think I don't want to argue theism. But what I do want you to know, is an actual
But that's
to
just a
show
side
me
point.
somehow that there is a theist.
Can you repeat that, John? I didn't hear. I turned the debate down a little bit. So I can hear you.
When people say
If there is
that's
no
not
God,
my
then
thing with
there
philosophy
must be
or
a
it's
God.
not important,
There is no God. Knowledge.
they're using it, and it's just that
Premise
shows
Right.
with that. Can we start?
they
He's-
haven't looked
Joe
into
premise
it as
for
much.
besides you just
Yeah,
bring
he's
them
using
all.
philosophy to say, well, I accept this
Which
premise, but I
one?
don't know where you're
Go
making
premise
that leap,
one.
and I'm not here connecting this.
For
That
which
like
one?
that is all
The one
philosophy.
you were just
And
saying.
here's the thing, like you can say that, but like if
But
you agree
to be
if
fair,
you
I think he's saying that it's not his
Yes, that
main
one.
field
Is that
of
what you're
interest. But
The
If that's
one you were
not,
just
then-
talking about, Eric.
well, no,
Choose
maybe
one.
so, but
Choose
here's
one.
the thing:
Okay,
is
Eric,
like
just choose one.
he's
Okay,
trying to
let's
use
go
this.
with the brain, the consciousness. Give me premise one. Let's
Like
go
here's
through
the thing: like if I agree
So I would
to a
say
debate
if
that's
atheism
on
is true,
philosophy and someone changes the
then
topic and
premise
starts
one,
bringing
then
up
if
historical
atheism is
things,
true,
it's
then,
perfectly legitimate for me to say, well, actually, I'm not that well versed
Hold
in
on,
that
pause.
area of
If
history. Can
atheism
we
is
get back to
true,
the philosophy? But when you're
naturalism is
having a
true.
debate that is a
I don't know if
philosophical
that's- I
debate,
don't
it's
know.
titled
Maybe that could be some
"Arguments
other
for or against
supernatural
theism." That's a
thing.
philosophical
When you
debate. You
define
don't get to just
atheism, are you
wiggle out of
saying,
it by
like,
saying, "Well, I don't study
atheism is the
this
same
much,"
as
or "This isn't my thing,"
anti-supernatural?
or you don't get to
Oh,
talk
because
about
atheism is
science
just
because you disagree with all the
if you're defining
scientists.
it as you don't believe in God,
Yes. Yes.
so you're defining it basically as anti-naturalism.
No, I'm
aren't
not-
there atheists who are that aren't necessarily naturalists?
So an atheist could hold beliefs as an atheist, but it doesn't mean that it's logically consistent with the atheist perspective in the first place. So I'm not saying you can't be an atheist and not believe in these things. I'm saying it's logically contradictory or logically incoherent or inconsistent to the atheist paradigm.
There you go.
If there is no God,
That's good. I'm not an atheist, so we can continue with the argument. So it's not against my
That's not the
paradigm.
point.
So
the point is
deal
not
with
that
what I
you are an
said there.
atheist. The point is
so you asked me to explain it.
Okay,
my argument.
Eric
I
is
explained my
presenting these
argument, so it
pieces
doesn't
of
apply to
data,
me. I'm
these
not
pieces
talking
of
about- I'm talking about
evidence,
the argument. So
and
it's not-
they
I know,
can't
but
point to
premise
the
one, but you keep bringing
conclusion.
up atheists.
Well, maybe there's
And
some
I'm not
middle
an
ground
atheist.
between atheism and
I've
theism.
already the premise.
It's definitely good to
Go ahead.
address
Keep on
the
with premise
topic
one.
of the
And I've
debate.
showed you now that
Are there
the way you're
rational reasons for
categorizing these things,
theism?
you're
What
categorizing
is it? Is
atheists as
theism
the same
rational?
thing as
Something
Yeah,
along those
pure
lines.
naturalists. But I
Like,
believe there are
some
atheists
reasons
who aren't necessarily naturalists in
Hey,
philosophy.
here are two arguments. The
So then your
argument
premise
for
is
naturalism
there's
and
another option
free
there.
will.
Oh, well,
So
there's
those
another
are three
option.
pieces of evidence that would make theism rational.
Sure, but you
Exactly.
have to demonstrate
I'm
the premises to be true.
no offense to
You have to
Skyler,
make that
but
argument.
he
Yes,
says
anybody
he
can be
studies
wrong about
theology,
anything.
but I don't
agree
know
with you, my
if he would
man.
understand the
But you gotta
distinction
make those
between
arguments
classical
to fill out
theism
the
and
case.
theistic
I
personalism,
have to make a
which
Right.
are two branches of
You could stop
general
interrupting.
theism. You don't have to be a
Stop
Christian
the
and a
chat.
classical
I-
theist.
it's
You don't
not
have to be a
about
Christian
that.
and a
We
theistic
do
person.
have to give Eric
Say,
some
I
time
start talking,
too.
I'm
You do
gonna-
have to give Eric some time to we'll give them a chance now to make.
Well, here's the
those,
thing. Like,
comments.
it's perfectly legitimate to say, "Hey, listen, I'm not an atheist. Okay, I would put myself more in the agnostic camp." And so I'm not arguing for atheism. But granted, the terms of the debate, I'm curious to see whether or not these are good arguments for or against theism, because that's what I want to do. And I'm not necessarily arguing for the negation of your conclusions, but I just want to explore them and see them.
But go ahead.
So that's fine, but the topic of the debate still has to be addressed whether or not the given arguments point to theism or not, or if there's an overriding argument that Skylar could present that points away from theism. And so what Eric is doing is he's not attacking a straw man. He's saying, hey, here I have these arguments that point to theism, which negate atheism, right? And if you're going to say something negates theism, then that would point to atheism. But then every time he brings up atheism, Skylar wants to just say, hey, I'm not an atheist. You're arguing against. You're not arguing against me. It's like, well, but that's not the point of the debate. The point of the debate is he's not arguing against your psychology. He's arguing against a worldview, and you're here to either argue against his premises, against his conclusion, against his evidence, or something there. But you can't just every time he talks about negating atheism say, hey, well, I'm not an atheist, and think that that's somehow a refutation.
Why I believe that, and I'm saying that it doesn't seem logical. It seems like it'd be logically possible. I'm open to it.
Right, but okay, wait. Are you saying you're open to it, or you're saying that you deny naturalism?
I'm open to both. To be honest with you, I could be open to naturalism or the supernatural. If I see evidence for the supernatural, that'd be fantastic. But I'm open to both of them. So I'm not. So how am I incoherent in my views?
So well, I'm confused here. You said, let's say I'm not a naturalist.
Okay, because I'm not necessarily a naturalist. I'm open.
Okay.
I don't know all that entails. Like I said, I'm not a philosophy major. So I'm open to both positions: the supernatural,
sure,
and it being all natural. I'm open.
Well,
that's where I'm at.
So allow me to ask a question here. So you haven't come to a position on whether or not naturalism is true. Is that correct?
I don't know if I can completely come to that position.
It's not what I asked.
I don't know how okay.
But it's a no.
Say it again.
So are you saying that you have not yet come to a position on whether or not naturalism is true?
So let me ask you something. When I say I don't think you can come to that position, right? Doesn't that entail a no, right? Don't you think that when I say something, so why? So hold on. But why? So why would you be snippy with me and go right back and be like, that's not what I asked? Well, sometimes when you're having dialogue with people, my man, you pick up on what they're saying. You don't be rude just to be condescending to them. So I'm just telling. This is what poisons the well, and I get more aggressive with you. I just want to let you know when you do shit like that. So the answer is I don't.
That's not an unfair thing for Skylar to say. I love Eric, but that's not an unfair thing for him to say.
I told you that I don't know if I don't know if naturalism is true. That's my position. I don't know if it's possible to be able to verify it.
Gotcha. And I don't ask to like get into a debate about it. I'm asking just so I can know where you're coming from. So, but you know what? Hey, sorry, I'll let you unpack that instead of giving just a one-word answer. Fair enough. I'll do that. So I apologize.
No, it's no worse.
Okay. So I'm curious that if you're agnostic,
I was in the same room so they can hug after the debate. No, what'd you say, John?
Are we going through the full debate?
Material things can exist.
Why can you not?
If only physical things could exist, then
I'll probably stay on until like 10:30.
Possible for
okay, that's fine. Yeah, we'll probably both sign off at 10:30. See, they'll probably be in the Q&A by then, so they'll probably be getting ready to sign off soon around that time anyway. So,
but
yeah.
I'll
keep an eye on the clock.
I can't help but wonder if you're doing this, even just for a hobby, and spending so much time doing debates almost every week, and you haven't even thought of one of the most central issues to whether or not theism is true. I can't help but wonder how much thought you put into this.
What does it have to do with the argument we were just making a couple minutes ago? Why did we go to just talking about me personally at this point? Are we moving away from the argument? Okay, well, here, I'll answer your question. Right, so I'll answer. I just find it strange that we're talking about the argument, then you talk about me personally.
Eric wants to talk about you. Eric's saying, okay, fine, I'll address you.
I'm just saying that it's complicated.
Why are you talking about me now?
And I'm being actually very charitable with the idea. You don't hear many people.
So in general,
saying
when you're having a good dialogue,
as open as I am,
it's good to practice the principle of charity. And to interpret your own rationally.
I deal with most.
I think this is just a good debate example.
I focus on.
I honestly think on both sides.
when you say theism,
and
theism
that's
can
why I
mean
think
any
people were
type of
talking
God,
past each other. Like
right?
last night, I had a great
Except for
conversation with two Calvinists
polytheism. There's multiple gods. You can
Mhm.
multiple
on
gods, right?
libertarian
So,
free will.
so when you
We
just say
disagreed
like, why haven't you
completely,
thought about
and
a
our
million
views are
types
almost
of
radically
gods?
different.
But
But
why
like
haven't you thought about Zeus?
we had
And thought all
a
these
great
things?
conversation.
Life's busy.
Yeah.
You got shit to do, my
You know
man.
what I'd be curious to
But
see is
I'm
Skylar
here
Fiction
when I'm
talk to
debating and
Josh
willing to
Rasmussen,
engage.
because you know how Dr. Josh Rasmussen goes like
Okay.
over and beyond
So
to be
I
charitable
think
and
it's a
to
very
meet the
relevant
person where
point
they
that
are
I
and
was
to
trying
use
to
their
make,
kind of like
is that
own
if you're
beliefs
really serious
and
about
see
this
where you can
question
get with them.
issues, and if
Yeah.
you're busy, then don't spend so much time doing
Except
it.
he's a theist, though,
But
right?
if you're genuinely curious and you're having this debate and discussion because you're genuinely open, which of course would assume free will, would assume rationality, and would assume consciousness, which I'd argue if those things exist, atheism, the belief there is no God, cannot be true. But setting that
See,
aside,
here's the thing. Like, I do
Are
love
we giving up the
Eric,
conscience
and
argument, moving away from it? Is that
kind
where
of
we're going?
because me and Eric are on
Because
the
we're
same
still at
team
premise
here.
one,
I
and
do
then now
kind of
we've
have an
gotten into saying you
inclination
should
to give
think
him the
more about
benefit of
this
the doubt and be
other
on
things
his side.
at the same time.
I will
I
say
don't really care
he
about your
did
opinion
come
on
into
what I
this
should do with my
debate
life,
with
my
kind of
man.
attitude,
I
knowing how
appreciate we don't know
Skylar
each
can
other. We're not
be,
friends,
and I think he
right?
just kind of
You don't have any clue
assumed that was
about my
going to
life
be
and what goes
Skylar's
on.
temperament, and so
You
Eric
should
kind of
probably
came
show
out of
some
the gate more
humility, some of
ready
that stuff that
to
Christ
be
apparently tried to
combative
teach
against
you,
that.
but it hasn't really worked.
And
So are we going to go back to the
so
let's go back
do
to
kind of
premise
put the
one.
blame
So
on
we were
both of
at
their
premise
sides
one.
in this.
We were trying to justify premise one. Are we leaving that argument now?
Well, first I'd say if you think that's the case, pray for me, right? But nevertheless,
I'm going to pray for you.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, maybe I'll pray to Raptor Jesus. Maybe Raptor Jesus, RJ will bless you with his cause.
Is he physical or non-physical?
He's metaphysical. No, he's not.
He's metaphysical. Oh, so then you would have to believe in non-physical things that exist. So
yeah.
First of
But
all,
in this particular area, yeah, I can't deny RJ up there under his claws.
Okay, great.
This is kind of funny.
So it seems like we're not even on a premise. I thought we just got into just kind of going back and forth on each other's positions because you started saying, well, that's not my position. So I started asking you questions, and then you want to go back to the premise that.
Well, I want to go back to the argument. I want to go back to the argument, not just asking.
Parodies like Raptor Jesus or the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
What the debate topic
I
is.
might just say you're only
anti-theist
because you think God, or you believe that something came from nothing, or consciousness pooped into existence. So I like Skylar and all, but like I think Raptor Jesus is pretty stupid.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what.
It's not reductio ad absurdum or even a parody.
Right.
Well, I can really tell me how it interacts with the brain, how it works.
I do want to point this out to the audience, though, which I mean, I'm sure that I've already said it a bunch of times. They probably already noticed it. But Eric was trying to talk about just the arguments, and Skylar was complaining, "Hey, this doesn't actually address any of my beliefs." And then so Eric said, "Okay, let me start asking you questions, start probing your beliefs, figure that out." And Skylar's going to say, "I want to. Why are we talking about me? Let's go back to the arguments." Like,
they're cause and effect relationship. So
pick one there, bud.
Let me define soul for you. Can I do that? Maybe that might. I mean, okay.
I don't know what souls and consciousness aren't necessarily. It's just an extra you're kind of throwing into the mix there. I don't know why we're gonna. What does soul has to do with consciousness? Are you coupling those together?
Well, I said let me define it, and that might help with the conversation. So.
Well, no, I don't need you to. I'm talking about consciousness, not souls, right now. I don't need you to define soul.
Well, when I give you the definition, you're gonna know why.
All right, go ahead. You can do it.
Okay. So I would define, I'm a substance dualist, and I would define the soul as an immaterial substance that contains consciousness and animates the body. So the soul, the consciousness would be a capacity of the soul. That being said, when you're talking about consciousness,
I don't understand. How does that work?
How does it work?
Functionally. Yeah. How does that happen?
Now, when you say functionally, do you mean like a physical type of functionality?
Yeah. Well, no. Just how is the soul interacting with the consciousness?
So I think the soul will be the self. So when I use the word I'm talking about me. I'm conscious. How do
This is,
I interact with myself?
It's not a defeater at all for substance.
Oh, okay. So, so you're basically saying that the consciousnous has nothing.
It's not,
to do
especially
with
if you go back to when we had Trent Doherty on the channel.
So you say
and I kind of
the question originally
made a
was,
point about
explain to me when people have
brain
damage,
the tool that the soul uses to interact in the world, and Trent Doherty, I think, rightly pointed out that there were some problems with using that, and Trent Doherty pointed out that kind of like the physical part of me and the soul, they're both like they both make up me, and so you don't necessarily have to have this super like bifurcated view where the two are like kind of these distinct things, but then somehow interact with one another.
Yeah, and that's the problem with substance dualism for me, that they treat the body God takes the dirt and creates the body, breathes the flesh into it, soul, and creates a rational
you're
structure.
stating it like it's a
Tyler
fact.
Morphin
But
well, the substance dualist seems to say all our personhood and identity.
consciousness coming from?
Yeah.
Where you don't believe the consciousness is coming from. You think it's from the soul, but I'm sorry. How do you damage a soul?
Could see someone accusing them of
affects the
possibly a
consciousness.
form of Gnosticism,
If I pop a few strings
and almost sounding like a ghost in the machine. That's not what Eric believes, but like extreme substance dualist.
or am I breaking an instrument that conveys that seed?
And also, I think you said this, just simply pointing out, just because maybe I don't know the mechanism by which they work, or maybe I can't give one, that doesn't negate the fact that you can point to these things like private access, like cessations, like freedom of the will, and say, hey, there has to be something immaterial beyond just the physical mass pieces that take up my brain or make up my brain.
That something is the same thing as. So just because I can show a cause and effect relationship or even a dependence relationship, it doesn't follow that A is the same thing as B.
How does Alzheimer's affect the soul?
Same thing I just explained. It's a cause and effect relationship. Just
but
like
I don't know. You're just saying cause and effect. I don't understand the cause and effect.
See, the holomorphic dualist.
Exactly. Please explain to me. How does a disease affect the soul?
But yet consciousness.
How would you measure that? How would you even know any of this?
So if you play an instrument,
and by the way, I would actually say you can explain
isn't
this on both views. Even if you have a view of dualism, you can still say that if the tool by which the mind operates in the world is damaged,
I know it's an analogy,
then of course that's going to
I think
affect
it's fair
the
to
way the mind's
use an
able to
analogy if he
operate. And then of
wants.
course on
No,
what
it's
the view you just said, it's like,
I'm
well,
just going to say at the end of your analogy, it's not the same. So
of course
if
it
you
would
want
make
to
up
do it,
things. It doesn't prove that
yeah, I'd love to do it.
the mind
So,
is the brain.
If I sit on a piano or get a guitar and there are certain keys or strings needed to play a certain note, then you can see how a cause and effect relationship by damaging certain keys or strings on a guitar or piano would inhibit my ability to play a certain song or note. Then you can understand that a cause and effect relationship can affect something indirectly or directly when the two things are not the same thing. So if certain keys on a piano are required to play the note C, and I destroy one of those keys, then I can't play the
John,
note C.
I got to
then
turn
you
this
can
down when you talk,
understand that in
because for some reason
principle,
on
if the
your
soul
microphone
uses
likes to
brain,
break up a
then
lot.
if I
All right, go
inject a
ahead.
certain part of my brain
Yeah,
that
I was
was
having
damaged,
problems with
then
it in
it
my one
affects
class
my
this
soul's
morning.
ability to interact with that part of the brain that was damaged, that has access
When they
to
use
information,
analogies
what
of
Paul
guitar
gave us
strings
earlier,
and fire producing smoke, I almost find that to be a dangerous analogy, because property dualism says that
we can understand why
mind is
sound
an actual
is,
property of
being
humans, but
affected.
it's dependent upon the brain. It arises from the
piano.
brain. So
We
maybe
can't
they can
measure
use the
a soul
analogy that a
have
physical
damage
guitar
consciousness,
creates
and
sound
well, we
waves.
can see that when people have brain damage.
So
actually,
I feel
when
like
people
a
have
good
brain damage,
hypothetical analogy would be
usually
like,
it messes with their
imagine you have,
mind.
I mean,
we
the
mapped out the human brain to where we
correct
know what
example of
particular
the bowling
areas
ball on the
affect
pillow from all
memory,
eternity.
types of things.
I would use that to
Or
almost
even
describe
neuroplasticity.
holomorphic dualism,
Now,
how
you'd
you
have
need
to
both
go
at the
talk
same
to
time
neuroscience. I mean, but
to
there's
create a
parts of
rational
it where
structure that we call human
you've
beings.
never read about what parts of the brain.
Except that you can separate the bowling ball and the pillow and have two separate entities.
I think you're missing the point of the analogy, because I can break down the other analogy and be like, well, a guitar doesn't have consciousness or whatever biological
But honestly,
functions.
though, if you honestly can't
Maybe.
answer that question,
I mean, and on that, I personally like the analogy of a person using an instrument. Now I agree, it's different because probably on the view you and I would take, like the person and the instrument are kind of the same thing. Yeah. So, but I don't know.
So consciousness is a first-person introspective kind
No.
of thing.
Are you explaining how it works? You said you were going to
Quantum
explain how the
entanglement can maybe be a good analogy, how you have these two separate
I can get a
particles that are connected,
Yeah,
and
as
like
long
that
as you
shows you
do
affect
that,
the other
and
one.
go to something
They
else
go
and have
above.
your-
They're not predictable, and the other one starts spinning almost faster than simultaneously.
Thanks for your
the speed of
patience.
light.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what Christ asked us to do.
But I have to read more into
You're not
holomorphic.
perfect at it, though.
Yeah.
Oh no, of course not. Pray for me. That's what I said.
No.
So when you,
I will. I will.
I appreciate that. So when consciousness is a first-person introspective kind of thing, here's what I mean by that, and here's why it's relevant to what you're asking. So a neuroscientist can know more about my brain than I do, but they could never know more about my mental life than I do, because consciousness is something that is accessible only to myself, not by a third-party observer. In other words, you can't crack open my skull and see my beliefs. When I think about a pink elephant, you said you saw my debate with T. Jump, and I would encourage people to see that as well. And the commentary I made on that, there's no pink elephant inside my brain. These are mental states that are not physical things. Otherwise, you'd have that pink elephant inside the brain. Now, I would say the only way we're able to map that is
T-Jump said there was a
the person,
pink elephant in
and
his
the
brain.
reason we
If you
had
don't
to
believe it,
ask
go
them
watch
is
it.
because consciousness is not something that a third-party observer
Oh, and
can
just
just
with
look at in
T-Jump's
a physical
example,
sense or measure
you could just
physically.
say that my
So
mind
when you
produced
look
an
at a
image on the
C5
brain.
firing in my brain, or a scientist
Right.
probes my brain, and they say they see certain neurons firing, they write down brain state X equals, and I'm just simplifying here. Brain state X equals, and they say, "Hey, Eric, what did you feel? What were you thinking about? Oh, you know what? I just had a thought of puppies. Brain state X must equal puppies. Let's try that again. Shock them again, give them brain state X. Brain state X. Eric, what did you feel? Puppies. So they had to ask the person because consciousness is not something you can just directly observe. So the only way in principle we can even map the brain is by asking the person and looking
That's
at
a
the
really,
correlation
really,
of
really
brain
strong
states.
point.
Why? Because
Sure.
consciousness
And what's
is
the
not
problem with
physical.
that? Well, yeah. Well, I'm sorry. How does that not work? Like if you're saying they're
As
able to use an MRI machine or something, whatever they use to read brains, and then they're doing these tests. How does that test not work? Like I see that you're just shedding doubt on it. You're like, well, I don't believe it. That's basically what you kind of said. Like, I don't know how they could do this, but it took a long time to get to you actually explaining it. So I'm sorry. Could you explain specifically
MRIs just scan
how that works for me.
Up.
So
it tells you.
The point Eric's making is that there is this kind of private access, right? That like, okay, you can say, hey, there's these motions in my brain, and then it produces a thought about dogs. The problem is there's nothing about
you were saying
arranging
you're saying
atoms or particles or brain matter. There's nothing about the physical stuff that makes up your brain and the way you could arrange it that has any causal connection to a thought about dogs. So the fact that there is a thought about dogs, just because you can map it on a certain physical structure, doesn't mean that the thought is the physical structure.
I said
no. I was asking you.
Yeah,
remember you
that's
told
just
me,
like
hey, if
your
just
opinion, man.
You made this whole big thing about it, and you asked me, hey, is it okay for me to go now to answer your question? No, I asked you a question because you originally asked me how it's done. I said no. Okay. And then I asked you to explain how it's done. And that's what you were supposed to be doing just now.
Yes, I explained how it's done.
Okay. So you didn't, you explained that. But then when explaining how it's done, you dismissed it as if like this isn't the proper method in order to, yes, you dismissed it and said that how they, okay. So do you agree now? Do you agree with the scientists who have studied this or do you disagree?
I don't.
You're confusing yourself here. I'm not quite sure how you're not following what's going on here. Do you agree?
Really?
You obviously don't agree with the scientists who believe that consciousness comes from the brain and that not consciousness, but that we can map out the human brain. You obviously don't believe that.
What makes you think I don't believe it? I'm curious because I don't think you're following.
Oh, I mean, just tell me yes or no. Do you believe it or not? Do you believe there's a part of the brain that holds memories? How about that? That's a specific. No.
That's a different question.
Okay. So you disagree. Okay, no, but that's specific. I'm talking about the brain.
And
I was talking about how we mapped out the brain. That's what the whole conversation is about.
Stop yelling.
I'm not yelling. I don't know if my mic really picks up something.
Honestly, as a Howard
Morphin, my vocals. Dude, I'm smiling. I'm not yelling at you. Don't be so sensitive.
I think they're produced by
armor of Christ. Put on the armor of Christ.
Recorded videos and held in brain.
You have courage,
I don't think that's a problem, even for substance
Did your little testicles go up?
I don't either, but
We can talk about that later, but we're gonna get back on
here's the thing. I think yes to a degree, but also when you look at studies for like
that kind of attitude and characteristics,
because also the memories are accessible by your direct access, right? Now you can say maybe that's just your consciousness has direct access to the brain, but again, when you understand that, of course scientists disagree, not disagree, but dispute whether it's 7 years or 15 years. But if you take the larger than 15 years, every cell in your body, including your brain, changes every 15 years. And so, if it was purely stored in the brain, and Eric should point this out, then you shouldn't be able to remember anything more than 15 years ago. And yet you can, so that shows that even if there's kind of a storage mechanism in the brain, that can't be the only thing that stores memories.
I think my answer to that argument would be, well, you can move. You get a new computer every so often, but you can move hard files onto it with a thumb drive, so perhaps memories transfer over.
Get those balls, loosen them up a little bit.
Possible, but I think that would just go to show that the memories in and of themselves aren't something that's physical.
Let's go back. Yeah, let's go.
So, do want to let you know.
Yeah, but the memories on the hard drive isn't the hard drive itself.
A chance to kind of draw together the threads of what you've heard tonight. And
sure, but like
honestly, I think this may be a reason.
Even on the hard drive,
we start talking about consciousness was the main argument we talked about most of this debate so far. We got the premise one, never got past.
Because
premise
even though
one.
I can't stand TMM, but he makes an interesting point
That's where we're at.
that
So
like
we
a
continue,
computer
we
really
figure out
has,
how we can justify that
because
premise one. We can get past premise one. So
what
you
I'm
can work
my screen isn't the screen
If you have another
itself
question for me, I'm happy to answer
or
it.
necessarily the
If you want.
parts, but they're produced
I'm having
from
a
it.
good time.
So I almost see that as the rule of memory and how it relates to the brain.
I don't know if I
But like at the same time, though, how memory is formed, I think, is from consciousness and the experiences you have, and as Kyle calls consciousness proper, I think.
Yeah, so I
But
would say
you know,
we
I don't think it's a
have
defeater
formal
for
closings, although it's up to
substance
you guys.
dualism.
If
It's
you'd like
just
to do
my own
formal
view on
closings,
it.
we could do time sections. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we could kind of, in fact, I think that's probably a good idea. Just maybe at least 3 minutes, and then going into the Q&A.
Okay. Well, let
That's
me.
cool.
I
We'll
guess
at least get
I-
15 minutes of Q&A to
let
kind
me
of
just
answer along
explain
with them.
what I think, and I don't mean this respectfully. I think you're missing the point I was making. I never said that these things don't happen. I'm saying I agree we can, in principle, map out the brain, but the only way we can do that is by asking the person what's going on mentally. Because while we have access to the
It was a
physical
funny comment from the Supreme King.
components of the brain, we do not have access to the mind as a third-party observer. You have to ask the person because consciousness is not physical. So if consciousness were physical,
Let's take. We're
you
gonna
wouldn't have
watch
to ask
popcorn
me
and
what
watch
I'm
the replay
thinking.
of
You
this and
could
watch
just
chat
look
and
at
have a
my
great time.
brain
Well,
and
hey,
know.
listen, I really
But the only
appreciate
way
you
we
being
can map
here
it is by asking.
for our live
After we
stream.
map
So
it, which was
thank
based
you
on
for that.
asking, then from then on, we can keep trying to further map out the brain. So my point was,
Sure.
yes, you're right. I agree with what the scientists are doing, but that is something that lends validity to my position.
So, well,
Hey,
what I
James,
was,
do you see
I
what you
get
think
that
about this comment?
what you're saying, like you're explaining how the scientists do things, but you're not saying what the problem with it is. I don't.
There
The
is no
tone. That,
problem.
hold on. The tone that you're putting towards it, maybe I'm misreading your tone here, but the way you're kind of talking about it, you're talking as if there's a problem.
read it?
And obviously, you do think there's got to be some kind of problem because you don't
Hold
believe
on, I'm gonna
memory
turn
is
down. I can't hear
connected
you.
to the hippocampus.
I'll
So you
just
don't
look at
believe
it.
them on that aspect. You don't believe them in a lot of the aspects that they when the
Oh,
I got from the tone way you're talking about this is there's a problem with the methodology. If you think there's no problem with the methodology, I guess
Sorry
we don't
about the volume
disagree.
there. For my mouse like attached to
go
the
ahead.
volume thing there. Trying to move
The
it, turn it
methodology
down.
of how we come to map the brain. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the thing you were just explaining exactly. It sounded
no,
like your tone was that it's a bad methodology in which we do it. I might have misread it. Maybe it isn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, no offense. If that was a tone, it was a tone to the methodology of your way of thinking, tracking my argument. It wasn't about the methodology of how we map the brain. I was saying
That's
that
not
I'm
dealing with what I just said.
full-
Come on, man. You've been dodging a lot of questions in this debate, man. You're like, give me a minute, and then you ramble for 2 minutes about something that's not directly related to it. So I'm sorry. Do you agree? Is the methodology useful? Does it work? Direct question, yes or no?
Yes.
The methodology does work. So the results that they get are correct.
Yeah, I'd say so. All things being equal, sure.
Okay, so then you contradicted yourself because earlier you said that memory is not in the hippocampus, yet they've done testing to see, and you just said you agreed with how they did the methodology. You agreed with the conclusion. So this is, if you're wondering why I'm confused, it's you because you're contradicting yourself. Okay.
I mean, I don't know what else to say at this point because so you can rewind and watch it again. If you would allow me to use an analogy again, if I knew nothing about
it's not useful. You're not actually dealing directly with what I'm saying. But go ahead, if you want to finish up, do your last, say your piece, and then we can go to Q&A. I appreciate you having the conversation with me.
So let's say I knew nothing about pianos. I've never seen a piano before in my life. I hit a key and I listen to what sound comes out of it. And I can write down this sound comes out of it. And I hit another key. Then I hit a different set of keys. And I can map out the keys to a piano, which my father's actually done before. He's a musician. And he was trying to teach us at one point piano. And he would, since it didn't have the labels were like worn off or had eventually scratched off, he actually had to play the keys and then listen to what key was being played and said, okay, these three keys here, we're going to play this key and whatnot. So I can do the same thing with a piano. I can know nothing about a piano, but hit the keys, listen for the sound, and then map it out. But if the keys were nothing more than, if the notes were nothing more than the keys on the piano, all I had to do was look at the keys on the piano and know the notes, but that's not the case. Same thing in principle with the brain. You can't just look at a brain and know what someone's thinking.
Yeah.
And you can say,
And
"Well, we
these
mapped it out,"
analogies
and I
help
would
us
say,
understand
"Yes
because
and
it's like
amen." The
Skylar's
only way
pointing
we
out,
mapped
oh,
it
well,
out
what's the
is by
mechanism or what's
asking the
this or what's
person
the
what they were
relationship?
thinking when we
And maybe
saw
it's
the
not stuff we
correlated
can know
brain
wholesale,
state.
but so that's why
But that would
analogies
go
are
to lend
helpful in
validity to
helping
my
us kind of
position
understand this.
that
But then,
consciousness is
a guy
not
like Skylar wants
divisible or
to
the
just
same
say,
thing
well,
as the
not
brain.
analogies aren't addressing my point because it's not talking specifically about
Excellent.
the
Thanks so
thing.
much. And then, Skylar, if you have a couple of minutes you want to take to do your wrap up, we will then go into
I
Q&A,
would
folks.
say the memories are stored.
Yeah,
in the
I just
but aren't
say
produced
that
by the campus.
a lot of the same things that always happen when I talk
Or
to
if it
theists,
is, and it's
generally about God, is the argument becomes more about me and my style of debating and arguing than it does.
What'd you say?
Topic. It turns to more personal. You don't understand. You don't know this.
So,
you should study.
I would
more,
say
you
that
should do certain things.
most likely memories are stored in the hippocampus, but the hippocampus doesn't produce
I
them.
just wish we would have.
But even if it has a relation to producing it, you need consciousness and the hippocampus working at the same time, because the consciousness is what experiences it. And you could almost say that consciousness uses this camera to record its memories and so
It was
on,
a fun time. I love all you.
and then therefore stored in a physical hard drive or whatever.
Gotcha. Thanks so much.
Sort of my
Wanna
view
let
of
you
it.
know,
I don't know if
folks,
that's
I have
exactly how
both of these guys in the description. So in case you've enjoyed it, you can hear plenty
don't
more
know.
where that came from. Also want to let you know we appreciate those of you. We wanted to give all the street cred in the world and say thanks so much to those of you who are friendly there in the live chat, or maybe you're like debating, you're wrestling around, but you're at least not brutal, you're not abusive. We appreciate that, and so we do want to give you credit. And also, Calub, thanks for your super chat. As he likes to be called, Calub says, a magnificent win by Hernandez. You have a fan out there, Eric. Stupid whore energy. Thanks for your super chat. She strikes again. She says, Eric, even if free will doesn't exist, the brain can still make exorative inputs.
Okay. I don't even know what that means. But if there is no free will, then it's just your brain chemical reactions firing off, and you have no say-so in it. But that's not relevant to the argument of free will. I mean, if there's no free will, then yes, your brain's doing everything, and your brain's causally determined by external causal
She's trying to
factors
say that the
beyond its
brain
control.
can somehow
Gotcha.
cause free will.
Thanks so much for your super chat from
Nope.
Calub. Again, James, what's
See,
your workout regimen? That's funny.
compatibilism,
It's
possible to
like, just like chill out and stuff. Merlin72001, thanks for your super chat, who said, typical theist debater. Start
view
off
on materialism or
strawmanning your
naturalism.
opponent.
While on
No
Christian
knowledge of their
compatibilism
position,
and Calvinism,
but
you
then
can have a
easier
type of
for the
agency
lazy
that
to
results
attack
from
a straw
consciousness.
man than to
It's
defend
just not in the libertarian sense, because they usually say you're free to do what you want to do without force or coercion. But what you want to do is ultimately determined. But you
But
can.
see, that just is determinism. I don't let the naturalist compatibilist get away with it. I'm not going to let the Calvinist compatibilist get away with it.
pretty
Like
dishonest because
last night, they told me that there's two different categories. They're much better explaining compatibilism, but
super chat was originally for
basically they argue that sure, but it's through secondary means and not through direct force or.
Next up, opposer
I
of
agree with
religion.
you,
Thanks for
but,
your
like,
super chat. It says
it's
Skylar,
better
most
than
Yeah.
atheists say atheism is just a
Yeah, I mean, I've heard even
Are
Tyler
we
Vella's
all
case.
wrong, or are
It
you
just
wrong?
does. He makes it sound more intelligible than most people do.
No, I agree with you. I think that most. I don't.
but-
Think I disagree with that. I think most atheists would say they just lack a belief.
It's
in God.
even
That's what I'm
honestly
saying.
it's irrelevant for the Calvinists to try to salvage free
uh,
will because
doubting
they
the beginning of
still
the
negate
atheists.
free
I
will
don't
in
deny
the
that
in the
there
area
is
of life
God.
that matters
I don't
the
know if there's-
most,
No, but I
which is
agree. I think most
salvation.
atheists hold that position.
Gotcha. Apollo Jedi, thanks for your super chat. Who said?
Even the
Yeah,
Molinists,
by the
though,
way, there
would
are
be like,
some trolls in here.
yeah, sure,
I'll
you.
divide them
Well, a
equally,
lot of Molinists would
That's all.
and
believe
I
that you
will
don't have
skip
the
the
ability
ones that are just
to be free,
nasty.
but God just
One of
uses.
them's-
We
okay,
don't
so
know
anyway,
exactly what
says
choose,
warning, Skylar
and
already
he elects
seems
those,
shaken.
and God doesn't have to elect everyone who would choose. So there are some Molinists that could be like a soft type of Calvinist and still go to that main principle.
We have Michael Dresden. Thanks
I'm
for
not going to agree,
joining.
although I
Says,
didn't hear everything you
"Sorry
said
I'm
because your
late. Has
microphone's breaking up
Skylar
really
cried
bad.
yet?" Okay.
Oh, not yet.
Let's see. Apollo Jedi. Let's see. We're
I
gonna
said,
sort
what's
these
God's
out.
cause?
Club, thanks for your super
Okay.
chat. Who says Skylar acts like an angry rabid koala? Okay. Gotcha. Next up, for
Koalas are cool.
they are. They're cute.
That's a good
cute,
response.
yeah, they're
Koalas
very
are cool.
Merlin72001, thanks for your super chat, who said, last I checked, the title of the debate is Reasons for / Against Theism. Did no one tell Eric or is he just confused?
What? The opposite is true.
Go ahead.
Skylar's fiction is the one who wanted to make it all about his own psychology.
I don't see how I was confused. I responded, and I even go back in the beginning. I said my arguments will cut both ways. If there is no God,
you just need a
then that is
mental
position
let's be real.
the position
Right.
is against theism.
To make yourself
which would
not feel stupid.
show the inverse
it's
is
just
true.
the
The
fear of
reverse is
death.
true. That if
Can you barely
we
hear
believe
me?
there is no God is false.
I can barely hear
that
you, yeah.
doesn't mean that there is a God.
Okay, can you pause the video real quick?
Thanks so much for your super chat from Stupid Whore Energy strikes again, and she says,
Well, let me hear this question
your
real quick.
Clark Kent example your example shows that eventually that false belief will come home to roost. For example, when he is alone in a dangerous situation and thinks that he's invincible.
So that particular belief would apply to the car example, but in another situation, he could still have a different set of false beliefs, and the same principle would apply. So the point is,
There's a really good
example
example, real quick. I'll pause it so you can do what you need to do. But there's a really good example Brett Weinstein puts forward, which is, let's say you have the false belief that porcupines can throw their quills. It's like it's false, but it might be very beneficial for your survival because you're going to stay even further away from them. So it's a good false belief to have, or at the very least, it can aid survival. But it's not necessarily true, and that's kind of how evolution works. But go ahead, John.
How well can you hear me now?
Fairly decently.
How about now?
Pretty bad.
Man, my mic is like horrible. My dad, his voice is just pitchy, and my mic picks up his voice better than mine, and he's in a completely different room. It's like, I don't know if there's some paradoxical nature or essence of my microphone, or if my voice just isn't a good radio voice.
Cares that it grants.
A lot of this stuff she recognizes when people have to repeat, like what I'm doing.
It might also just be the
behaviors,
matter of this kind of playing with the video playing at the same time.
Topic, overly repeating themselves. Like these are all tactics that I see that kill time, and it gets frustrating. And yeah, maybe I shouldn't interrupt as much, but it is kind of annoying.
We've got another critical one from. He just told me I can't. I can't call him Caleb anymore. I have to call him his real name. Caleb, thanks for your super chat, who says, Skyler, let your opponent talk. Then, in all caps, state your rebuttal. Very simple. Other debaters do it just fine, and you can't for some reason.
Oof.
I don't know. I've had a lot of these debates, and they keep happening, so people keep talking to me. So apparently it's not that bad.
Next up, Pansel Jones, thanks for your super chat, who says, if S isn't scared of E's points, why not let E talk?
Ooh. I did lots of times.
Yeah, he did. To be fair, he did let her talk.
She says, for Eric, as a substance, that's how she sounds. As a substance dualist, how do you answer the problem of knowledge of other minds? The fact that we can know the mental states of others.
Yeah, well, first, I love the way you're reading the super chats. This is awesome. You're the best on that. So the problem of other minds. So I think it's something that we're justified in believing, and then unless we have a reason to believe otherwise, then we're justified in holding the beliefs. In other words, the beliefs would be innocent until proven guilty. So when you stick me with a pin and I say ouch, and I see James get stuck with a pin and he says ouch, I think it's perfectly fine to assume and place that same mental state that I experienced when I got stuck with the pin onto James because there's that same similar type of behavior.
Good point.
So it's an epistemic question that I think is justified in knowing that when I have this experience, he has it. But an interesting point is that, there is a possibility of how do we know that there's not something like inverse qualia, that when you get stuck with the pin and you say, ouch, you really feel this incredible euphoric feeling of happiness and joy.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And let's see. We've got
again. I'm going to point people to Josh Rasmussen's book, "How Reason Can Lead to God." It has the chapter on mind is really good in covering this, and a lot of those themes actually come back in the. I think might be the last chapter of the book.
Once to say it was fine to use, and that I thought it was fine to use analogies, but maybe I don't know. I could be wrong. I could improve. Caleb, thanks for your super chat. Man, these guys are coming at you, Skyler. This more so.
They keep paying for it too because they're all super chats.
Caleb spent all his money trash talking me. I'm glad the money goes to a good place. I'll do this every day for you, kids. I love you, brother.
He's sassy. He says in quotes, "I don't understand. Most honest things Skylar said." Oh, come on.
Oh.
You guys are trying to throw some sick burns. Tioga,
I love James.
Tioga, thanks for your super chat, who says, "Jimi Hendrix, please operate my brain." Is that a lyric? I don't understand. Okay. Stupid whore energy is added again. And she says, "Is Eric aware that, quote, souls can be induced to become depressed via physical drugs?"
Duh.
I mean, holomorphic goals or
Thanks so
something.
much.
Exactly.
I saw something like
This
that.
is such a
in
dead
movie
argument. Like, you
recently.
actually
All
have
right,
to be
never-
able to show
Logan,
that somehow it is
16,
reducible to the
thanks for
brain.
your
You
super
can't
chat.
just
They're coming at
show
you,
a
Eric. This-
correlation. And even causation.
all
You
he
could even
said
show
is,
causation that doesn't
Poor
refute
little
it.
Eric. Oh, okay. Stitch Alfredo, you can respond if you really want.
Well, I'm waiting for that Trump stimulus check, so hopefully it won't be poor for very much longer.
Nice. Superb. And Sigifredo Sarabia, thanks for your super chat, who says, "Eric, it didn't seem Skylar made it past premise 1 of what's supposed to fit your definition of theism. Then you agreed. What would be your point from there?"
Well, I think the only premise we actually got to was when I tried to talk about, I think it was free will, and I said if atheism's true, I would say the most logically positioned is naturalism. The next point would have been, given naturalism, when applied to human beings, you get physicalism. If physicalism is true, human beings are purely physical properties and states, then you can. This would apply to both consciousness and free will. If you're just physical properties and parts, you can't have consciousness, given that consciousness is not physical. And you can't have free will, given the law of causal closure, that every physical event must necessarily have a physical cause.
It's
So
10:30.
everything that
Do you want to
happens is
sign
going
off,
to be
John?
causally determined by external factors beyond your control.
Yeah, are you going to end
Thanks so
this
much,
stream?
Genius Tracks, for your
Yeah,
super chat.
we'll sign off together.
I mean,
so yeah,
Eric,
people,
you failed the
in
burden of proof
the
that
link in the
consciousness
description is this
is
debate. It's going on
non-physical.
live now. You can
Yet,
just click the
you
link
feel
in the description.
free
It'll
to
take you
use it
directly to
in
this
your
video, so you can
argument.
finish watching it live, finish the
That's
Q&A. I
fail.
appreciate you guys being
Well, free
here.
will exists if I am free to use my argument, so that would
predictions
at least
were
pass one argument.
pretty
And
close. If you
the
go back to the
argument I
beginning of the
gave,
video, I
one of the
knew Eric
arguments,
was
one of the
going to
many
come
arguments I
out
gave,
with
the one I
a
gave
free will
was
and a
based
soul
on
argument.
Leibniz's law of
I
identity,
had a suspicion that
which is
Skylar was
useful
going to
for any
try and
discussion
curb it
philosophy of
towards,
mind,
well,
that
I want to
if
argue
the
about the Bible,
mental
because then
states
I don't
and
have to deal
properties
with the
are not
more
identical
generic
with
theism.
the physical states and properties of
And
the
you
brain
saw
or
him
anything
kind of
physical, then it
try to
follows
take that tactic. I
consciousness
thought
cannot be
Skylar did
physical
take that
because it does
tactic.
not
He was
share
kind
any
of
physical states or
didn't want to
properties.
get into
When
the
you have two
theism
things in
versus
question
atheism debate. He
and
wanted
they're
to say, well,
different
I'm not an
properties, they're
atheist,
not
I'm
the
about
same
this.
thing.
And as soon as he got the little
Gotcha.
inkling,
Thanks
when he started
so
using the
much for
language of
your
the soul, he
super
said,
chat
oh,
from
well, is that the Christian
Iron
God? Is that the Christian
Zombie,
theism?
who
Can we start talking about
says,
Christianity?
"A debate
so,
between Hovind and Skylar
it was obviously
would be
pretty
entertaining."
hostile. I would say,
See,
honestly, it wasn't
Skylar,
pretty
I told
hostile. I mean,
you. I've been
obviously,
trying to
Skylar's
talk
debate with
Skylar
I told
today.
Trent
you.
Doherty was a
I
lot more
told you I
hostile.
would
This one
debate
wasn't
get
that
over. You gotta
bad.
get you.
It's just
You
when you
make
have
that
two
happen.
people with the
I
kind
will
of
do
temperaments
it.
that
We
these
can't-
guys do. And I
we
think
We
Eric
can't debate
Eric is
evolution.
a
though,
no
because I
nonsense
don't
kind of guy, and I
give a
think he
shit about evolution.
expected
You gotta do-
Skylar to
maybe
get rude
something
because
connected,
Skylar
but
has that
not
tendency,
direct,
and so
you
he
know?
might have, I
Agreed.
think,
It's Skylar's,
acted
he's right. He
preemptively
has said yes to
in
it.
response, and
I'm
and
not.
obviously,
We have to.
you know,
I don't
I
know if we're
put
gonna
the.
get Hovind to come back
But
on.
honestly,
at the same
overall, I thought
time,
it was. It
We're not.
had
We're
enough
not as
substance
tight
to
as we
get
used to
to,
be.
and I
Nathan
think
Artwork,
Skylar
thanks for
just
your
didn't deal
super
with his
chat. I'm
arguments.
gonna
He
read
just tried
this.
to
I'm kind of
obfuscate the
thinking. I'm
points
like,
and say,
what
well, that's
should
not
I do?
convincing to me, or
I don't know. It's not a
you
big
know,
deal.
different
So
things.
they
But what were
say,
your
yeah, I mean,
thoughts,
you guys
John?
already know. James, what's your
My only
opinion
real
on the
thought
debate?
is I
Is
was
there good
surprised
reason
he
for
didn't go into the
theism?
problem with people. I said my only real thought is I was surprised Scholar Fiction didn't try and go with like a logical problem of evil against classical theism or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm surprised too because you know that's usually his slam dunk. It's certainly a slam dunk when he's talking about Christian theism, but I mean when you kind of rule the Christian part out of it, I am surprised he didn't try to go into more of the descriptions of horrible things that happen and say, hey, how does a good God justify this? But yeah, I mean I think what you saw was a guy Eric who came prepared with arguments to address the topic of the debates, and a guy Skylar who didn't, and you know accused Eric of, well, it's appeal to authority, so I'm not going to talk about the science with you about the science on different things. But yeah, I mean, I hope this was enjoyable for people. Let me know in the comment section if you're watching this later, or even in the live chat now if you want to see more of these. I'll get in touch with James and figure out what we can set up and what we can work out in the future. But until then, also go subscribe. I'll add John's channel, JMD Apologetics 101, to the description for you guys to go there and subscribe. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so yet. And I'll see you guys
don't subscribe
And
to this.
yeah, yes. Do it.
No.
And turn on notifications. Subscriptions don't mean a whole lot anymore, especially because
Unsubscribe and just
yeah,
hit
well,
notifications.
John's unsubscribing on purpose, but YouTube will actually automatically unsubscribe people. So click notification bells so that you can get updates on videos. Go check out the video I just did for trusting Ben Shapiro, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.